Chapter 1468, Battle Among the Origin Realm. 1. The people moved carefully and extremely slowly through the tunnel. They moved slowly not because they feared the streams of energy within the tunnel but because they feared that the tunnel would collapse. Although the tunnel had become much more stable, it could only allow receival experts to pass through. Once people with strength beyond that stage entered, the unstable tunnel would become even more fragile and risk collapsing. The people moving through the tunnel were all at receival. 6 receival experts was the limit the tunnel could currently withstand. As a result, the 6 of them needed to keep their presences carefully concealed and their energy hidden within their bodies. We're getting closer and closer to that beautiful world. I can even vaguely sense its entrance. I hope the journey henceforth will be very smooth and without any obstacles. This world also possesses Origin Realm experts. I believe there must be at least one Origin Realm expert guarding the entrance of the tunnel right now. Once we approach the entrance, there will definitely be a battle. It's impossible to pass through smoothly. You're right. I refuse to believe that the cultivators in this world would be that stupid. There will definitely be an Origin Realm expert at the entrance of the tunnel. Once we get discovered, we have to charge out immediately, as quickly as we can. The tunnel may collapse if we travel at our top speed, but it won't collapse in an instant. We'll be able to pass through the exit successfully with our speed before it collapses, and then we'll follow the Spirit King's plan and use the secret treasure from the Spirit King to trap that returnance expert. Anna is responsible for securing the tunnel while the 4 other receival experts and 3 Saint Emperors with Saint weapons will be handled by us, an old man said among the 6 of them. Their world knew how many peak experts the Tian Yuan continent possessed. To the 6 of them, there was no one they feared among the world with the Tian Yuan continent aside from the returnance expert. This was because the 6 of them were the most powerful receival experts among the several dozen present in the world of Forsaken Saints. We also have to pay particular attention to that person with 2 swords. The Spirit King has specifically warned us to be careful of him. He's comprehended the same laws as the Spirit King, so he won't be any weaker than us, the only female among the 6 of them said with a stern voice. I heard that this beautiful world lacks origin energy. It sure is surprising that a cultivator can comprehend the same laws as the Spirit King in such conditions. I do feel rather eager at the same time. I don't have the right to witness the Spirit King's way of the sword, so the person in this world will be just enough to satisfy my curiosity. An old man, who was just skin and bones, strangely laughed as coldness filled his eyes. Old Kumu, don't underestimate the person with the 2 swords. He's been singled out by the Spirit King after all. He may only be a receival expert, but he has comprehended the same laws as our great Spirit King. If you underestimate him, be careful of being felled by his swords, sneered the woman. Her slender stature was distorted by the extremely unstable space, only revealing a blurry figure. The other 5 people appeared the same as her. The skinny old man called Kumu sniggered. He said in a dismissive voice, Anna, aren't you overestimating that person too much? Even if the Spirit Kings has specifically warned us about him, he's only at receival. I may not be able to claim that I am invincible among the receival experts, but killing me won't be easy. At least, none of you could snatch victory in a one-on-one battle against me. The 6 of them communicated using a technique, so they made no sound at all. There was no sense of time in the spatial tunnel, but the exit to the Tian Yuan continent finally appeared before their eyes. Their faces could not help but light up at the sight. They had finally arrived and had not come across any obstacles. The journey was so smooth that it surprised them. Even if we're discovered, we can explode with our full strength and charge out of the tunnel from this range, Anna happily thought to herself. At the same time, in Flame City, which was 1,000,000 kilometers away, Jian Chen had just completed the revival of an Emperor armament in the secret room below ground. Just as he planned to continue on another Emperor armament, his eyes suddenly narrowed. He raised his head and gazed into the distance. His eyes became extremely sharp and grew brighter. They seemed to project two rays of light, which collided with the walls of the secret room, forming two finger-sized holes in the reinforced wall. "They've come." Jian Chen's face immediately sank. It then became filled with cold killing intent. In a flash, he vanished from the secret room. Almost the moment Jian Chen had vanished, the sky above Flame City turned violet. Coupled with the clear resonance of a sword, a streak of dazzling, violet light suddenly appeared. It shot into the distance at an unbelievable speed, disappearing in a single moment. Even Saint Emperors would have struggled to catch its shadow. As the violet light disappeared, the violet sky rapidly returned to how its normal hue. The violet light had appeared and disappeared in less than a second. In such a short amount of time, many weaker people in the city failed to sense the changes in the sky. All they heard was the echo of a sword's resonance. However, many people in the streets still managed to catch the flash of violet light. It immediately threw the entire city into chaos. Bai Hai, Yu Yu, Bai Lian, Ming Dong, Du Gufeng, Xiao Tianyu, Yun Zheng, and the other powerful experts all exited the city lord's estate. They stared at the sky in surprise as uncertainty appeared on their faces. "It's brother. Brother's just left Flame City." Seeing how he left so aggressively, has the world of Forsaken Saints come? Bai Lian softly murmured. She gazed in the direction Jian Chen had disappeared in as worry filled her face. Yu Yu also gazed in the direction Jian Chen had flown. She clenched her hands and was nervousness. Worry was starting to fill her heart as well. In the mountains to the north, Feng Xiaotian was currently explaining a formation in detail to over 100 Saint Emperors of the four races. Soon after Jian Chen had left, his face suddenly changed and he stopped talking. He gazed in the direction of Mercenary City. Gui Haidao and Yang Lai sensed something as well. Gui Haidao immediately stood up and a blade hovered above his head. He radiated with a tremendous presence as his clothes fluttered in the still air. He gruffly said, "They've come. There has been a change in the tunnel. Experts of the foreign world have come. Everyone, immediately follow me to fend off the enemies." Feng Xiaotian cried out. A jade-white duster appeared in his hand. He ripped open space gates with Yang Lai and Gui Haidao and left. The Saint Emperors below did not hesitate at all. They all radiated with powerful battle intent. They all created space gates as well and rushed to Mercenary City. Xiaoling had already appeared at the entrance of the tunnel in the ruins of Mercenary City. She blocked the entrance with her body. Her naive face bore some fear and dread, but her eyes were exceptionally determined. She stared deep into the tunnel and gritted her teeth. She nervously said, "I can't let them come over. I must not let them come over. I have to stop them." Chapter 1469, Battle Among the Origin Realm, 2, Xiaoling quickly flew into the tunnel. She suddenly pressed down with her hands and an extremely terrifying power erupted from them. The power far exceeded receival, having reached returnance. Boom! The terrifying power viciously struck the spatial tunnel, causing the entire structure to violently shake. The streams of energy in the tunnel became even more dangerous. Allowing 6 receival experts to pass through the tunnel was already the limit of its current stability. If a returnance expert entered, even if they kept their presences and energies concealed within them, the tunnel would become unstable and collapse. Not only had Xiaoling entered the tunnel, but she had also erupted with all her strength at returnance and attacked the tunnel, immediately causing thick cracks to appear. The entire tunnel shook violently and began to collapse bit by bit. A few places had even fallen apart, almost causing the tunnel to break in half. "We've been discovered. Quick, immediately charge out as quickly as we can. We can't get sucked into the void outside the tunnel, or even we, receival experts, will permanently become lost in the infinite cosmos." The faces of the 6 experts sank, and without any hesitation, they immediately erupted with all their speed and charged forward. They wanted to reach the Tianyuan continent before the tunnel collapsed. Oh no! The person guarding the tunnel really is that returnance expert. Be careful, everyone. Try as hard as you can to dodge her attacks. Duo Fu, prepare the secret treasure from the Spirit King to trap the returnance expert. As long as she can't take part in the battle, this beautiful world will belong to us, Kumu said with an icy voice. Coldness flickered in his eyes as he stared at the slender figure at the end of the tunnel. The 6 of them had been reduced to blurs within the tunnel. They had already begun to charge out as quickly as they could. Since they had been discovered, the 6 of them didn't need to hide anymore. They all erupted with their full strength. Terrifying energy was wrapped around every single one of them. They smashed through streams of energy, which were wreaking havoc on the tunnel, and aggressively charged forward. Even though they would speed up the rate the tunnel was collapsing, they no longer cared, because the tunnel was unable to be completely destroyed. Even if it was riddled with cracks, the laws of the world would continue to hold it together. It would recover again. I can't let them come over. I can't let them come over. You baddies aren't allowed over here. Xiaoling stood in the collapsing tunnel as she gritted her teeth. Her gaze became more and more determined. She seemed to have abandoned all the fear within her. The only thought left in her was to prevent the arrival of the people in the tunnel using all she had. Unknowingly, her originally weak-looking figure appeared extraordinarily large. She was clearly a childish girl around 11 or 12 years old, but she was giving off a heroic feeling. She used herself to stop the advance of the 6 receival experts from the world of Forsaken Saints. The 6 receival experts were not the only things contained in the tunnel by Xiaoling. There were also the violet streams of energy that constantly spewed forth as well. The streams of energy originally wanted to rush out of the tunnel, onto the Tianyuan continent, and then into outer space, but since Xiaoling stood there right now, the streams were unable to get closer than 30 meters to Xiaoling. They were all forced back into the tunnel by her. The receival expert with the name of Duo Fu had pulled out a disc. The Yinyang 8 trigrams had been carved onto it, and it shone with faint, azure light as a mysterious and ancient presence circulated within it. The moment Xiaoling discovered the disc, she became extremely stern. She could actually feel the sliver of a threat from the disc. Xiaoling had no idea what the disc was, but she understood its power. Without any hesitation, she immediately closed her eyes. Her petite figure hovered in the trembling tunnel. She seemed solemn as the force of slaughter gradually arose from her body. Oh no, she's casting a secret technique. God damn it, just any single attack from a returnance expert is not something we can stop. If she uses a secret technique, the 6 of us are done for sure. Duo Fu, what are you doing? Why don't you hurry up and use the secret treasure? Our only method of stopping her is that treasure, Anna said urgently. Duo Fu did not reply. He was extremely stern as he formed a seal with both hands. He chanted as the azure disk above his head lit up. The diagram on it seemed to have been activated, beginning to revolve slowly. The mysterious and ancient presence that flowed within it became heavier and heavier. In the end, Duo Fu bellowed a sound and the disc shot toward Xiaoling as a streak of light. 9 godly arts, Slayer. At the same time, Xiaoling used her secret technique. Terrifying, surging energy condensed in her hands. Forming claws, she viciously swept them in front of her. As she clawed out, the surroundings changed. A region of the tunnel was immediately reduced to a void. Xiaoling had ripped open the space in the tunnel, causing eternal darkness to descend in front of her. But soon afterward, a resplendent streak of light tore through the darkness, radiating with a powerful presence that caused the 6 experts to pale as it charged toward them. This attack was condensed from the force of slaughter and radiated with the presence of slaughter, enough to annihilate the surroundings and harm the souls of people. Before Xiaoling's attack had even arrived, the 6 receival expert felt a sharp pain in their souls. Their expressions drastically changed. Boom! A loud rumble erupted in the tunnel, and Xiaoling's attack collided with the azure disk in the air. The azure disk immediately conjured a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams diagram, which was surrounded by countless inscriptions. As the diagram slowly revolved, it actually stopped Xiaoling's attack. The disk did not slow down at all, continuing toward Xiaoling. Xiaoling's expression drastically changed. She shot back, leaving the tunnel. However, the disk, which had already transformed into a 30-meter-wide diagram, arrived above Xiaoling's head. It radiated with a mysterious, ancient presence. Xiaoling possessed the mind of a child. She did not possess enough battle experience, especially when the diagram loomed over her head. She showed a sliver of fear and became slightly flustered inside. Despite her fear, she did not forget to counterattack. She immediately struck the diagram above her as hard as possible in an attempt to smash through it. However, the mysterious power of the diagram was far greater than Xiaoling had imagined. All her attacks were absorbed by the diagram the moment they collided with it. They did not damage the diagram at all. Instead, the diagram fell as countless inscriptions wrapped around her body, immobilizing her. No matter how much she tried to erupt with her returnant strength, she was unable to break free from the diagram. Xiaoling's confidence shattered when she encountered a situation she had never experienced before. She became extremely flustered. Her heart filled with fear and dread. She burst into tears and sobbed, "Master, Master, where are you? Come save me. I'm going to be taken away by the baddies. Master, quick come. Master, if you don't come, I'll never see you again." Sob, 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 sob. Fantastic. We've trapped the returnant's expert. We can't stay much longer in this tunnel, so let's quickly charge out. The 6 foreign experts were all overjoyed. They immediately tried to finish off the last part of their journey. Suddenly, a bright, violet streak of light appeared and shot into the tunnel with a shocking sword chi just when they were about to exit the tunnel. Chapter 1470, Battle in the Tunnel. The violet light was dazzling and resplendent. It outshone the sun, illuminating the collapsing tunnel. The terrifying sword chi was filled with destruction. As it pressed against the space in the tunnel almost fell apart. 3 meters of space, near the exit to the Tianyuan continent, fell apart. The space there had completely collapsed. All that was visible was a pitch-black void. Strands of invisible laws clung to the ends of the uncollapsed space, connecting the 2 portions together. The moment the violet light appeared, the 6 experts, who were hurrying toward the exit, all revealed different expressions. Even though the space around them had severely collapsed, they could not help but stop and sternly stare at the shocking violet light obstructing them. "I sense it. It's the Spirit King's laws. The person that the Spirit King has warned us about has come," a receival expert said with a heavy voice. Before now, they had not really attached much importance to the person that the Spirit King had mentioned, because they were the strongest among the experts of the receival realm, having all reached late receival. Even if the Spirit King had described the person as powerful, he was still in the receival realm, the same level of cultivation as them. Even if he was powerful, it was impossible for him to be too powerful. They may not be able to defeat him, but they were confident they could protect themselves. However, they truly understood just how powerful the person mentioned by the Spirit King was when they sensed the terrifying sword chi within the violet light. The sword chi had surprised the 6 of them very much. As soon as the resplendent violet light appeared in the tunnel, it immediately shot toward the 6 of them with lightning-like speed. Just the sword chi was enough to crush the streams of energy. The streams of energy that even Saint Emperors needed to avoid in the tunnel vanished wherever the violet light passed. It was a strange scene. At the same time, wherever the violet sword light went, a thin layer of cracks would appear in the surrounding tunnel, increasing the rate at which the tunnel was collapsing. The 6 receival experts all narrowed their eyes. They stared at the violet light as it rapidly approached them. They could clearly see a sword encased in the violet glow. Both the dazzling light and shocking sword chi originated from the sword. "Let me handle it. Let me witness this person's way of the sword and see just how powerful it is," sneered Kumu. He took a step forward and a terrifying, tremendous presence radiated from him. It pushed the violet streams of energy far away. They were unable to get any closer than 300 meters from him. Kumu's skinny figure seemed to become extremely large. His presence was as heavy as a mountain, vaguely dominating. A crescent blade had appeared in his hand. It flickered with a pressing cold light. Mysterious inscriptions carved had been into it. Suddenly, Kumu seemed to have fused with the crescent blade, causing it to shine brighter. It began to radiate with an extremely brutal blade chi. Afterward, he fused with the sword and sent a terrifying blow toward the violet light. The strike contained all his power at late receival. He did not hold back at all. Ding! The crescent blade entered the area illuminated by the violet light and collided with the Ziying sword. The clear ringing sound of a collision rang out, immediately causing the tunnel to tremble even more violently. Terrifying cracks filled the entire tunnel. Many spots were so damaged that the vast, endless darkness outside the tunnel was visible. The Ziying sword's advance was stopped by that attack. Its dazzling violet light dispersed and the Ziying sword was revealed. It drifted back like a fallen leaf. Kumu was blown back. His silver hair was ruffled and a few slashes even appeared on the clothes near his chest. Some traces of blood could vaguely be seen near the cuts. No wonder the Spirit King warned us about him. He really is powerful. The way of the sword really is powerful, Kumu said in a cold voice. He grew sterner and stared ahead. A figure had silently appeared at the entrance of the tunnel. The sword that let out a violet light hovered above his head with another sword, which glowed with an azure light. They loudly thrummed together. 3 figures could vaguely be seen standing behind that first figure. It was not difficult to tell from their statures that one was a female, one was a burly man, and one was a young child. The 4 of them were Jian Chen, the sea goddess, Tai Ta, and Xiao Jin. The 4 of them had all entered the collapsing tunnel. With their strength in the origin realm, as long as the space in the tunnel had not collapsed completely, they would not face danger as long as they did not end up in a void. The streams of energy in the tunnel were unable to approach them. Jian Chen stood at the very front of the 4 of them. The azulate swords hovered above his head, radiating with a shocking sword chi. Jian Chen's presence had undergone an overwhelming change. The current him seemed like a divine sword while the space around him seemed to have become his domain. Under his influence, whether it was the air or the rapidly moving streams of energy, all of it seemed to have become sharp swords. The 5 receival experts behind Kumu all stared sternly at Jian Chen. Jian Chen made them feel like they were facing the Spirit King, because the 2 of them both comprehended the way of the sword. The aura of the way of the sword that they both radiated was very similar. At this moment, Jian Chen grabbed the Ziying sword. A bright, white light immediately appeared on the sword, which was surrounded by a violet light, causing the sword chi from the sword to become even more powerful. He stabbed it toward Kumu, who stood at the very front. The attack seemed simple, but it contained the ways of the world. An energy that belonged to the ways had been fused into the strike, causing it to become extremely powerful, even greater than when a receival expert used a secret technique. The way of the sword was one of the 3,000 ways, which were also known as laws. Jian Chen had used his comprehension of the way of the sword in the strike. His attack contained the power of ways, or in other words, the power of laws. Even though his comprehension of the way of the sword was not particularly deep, having just reached an initial understanding, it still contained the power of laws. Its power could not be compared to receival experts who had not comprehended any ways. Terrifying sword chi spread out with the strike, as if the tunnel had become filled by supreme sword chi. Densely packed slashes had even appeared around the tunnel. Ku Mu narrowed his eyes. He had already been locked onto by the sword chi. Faced with such an attack, he actually felt like he was unable to dodge it. Taking it on forcefully was the only way to go. First transformation of the blood sun and crescent moon, force of sunfall. Second transformation, force of moonrise. Third transformation, force of full moon. Ku Mu suddenly bellowed out and used his strongest secret technique. He slashed out 3 times with the crescent blade in his hand. As soon as he used the secret technique, a world suddenly appeared behind him. In the blood-red sky, there was a blood-red sun and a blood-red, crescent moon. It was the sky of the world of forsaken saints. With his first slash, the blood-red sun appeared behind him. He fused with the blood sun's power and used it in the first attack. With his second slash, the blood-red moon rose slightly and fused its power into his second slash. With the third slash, the crescent moon became a full moon. It radiated with a demonic red light, as if it had been dyed by blood. His crescent blade fused with the full red radiance of the moon, causing it to become a bright blood red. Chapter 1471, Slaying a Receival Expert. 1. Ku Mu delivered the 3 slashes consecutively. Each attack contained a different level of power, but the might they contained was just shocking. Each slash outshadowed the previous one. Ku Mu's third slash had fused with the blood-red light of the full moon. It was so powerful that even peak receival experts would reveal a different expression when receiving it. Just the power of the third slash surpassed the previous 2 slashes. The third slash from Ku Mu even made the 5 other returnance experts from the world of forsaken saints gasp. The gazes they sent toward him were filled with surprise. I never thought that Ku Mu had comprehended the third transformation of the blood sun and crescent moon. Only a few returnance elders have comprehended it in our world. Ku Mu's sure hidden it well. We've all stopped at the second transformation. He's actually left us in the dust and comprehended the third transformation. In our world, Ku Mu's already become the greatest receival expert. Aside from him, I've never heard of someone else who's managed to comprehend the third transformation at receival. The power of the third transformation really is shocking. If a receival expert received that strike, they'd be heavily injured or end up dead. Even returnance experts would have to face it seriously. The 5 receival experts all sighed emotionally. Ku Mu's status skyrocketed. There were even 2 of them who looked at Ku Mu with some fear. Boom! With a violent rumble, Ku Mu's technique violently collided with the Ziying sword. The 2 immediately erupted with a terrifying pulse of energy. The energy transformed into a terrifying storm that wreaked havoc on the tunnel, causing it to tremble violently. The tunnel became even more damaged. A 300-meter chasm appeared between Jian Chen and Ku Mu, forcefully severing the tunnel. Even though the tunnel appeared severed, slivers of invisible laws still remained, holding the entire tunnel together like fibers. The violently tunnel shook while space was forcefully distorted. Jian Chen and Ku Mu could not see each other. Powerful pulses of energy wreaked havoc in the huge chasm between them, blocking their vision. The violet glow of the sword had vanished. Ku Mu revealed a sliver of joy when he saw that light was gone. Although his vision was obstructed and the senses of his soul could not be used in the tunnel, preventing him from understanding Jian Chen's situation, he believed that the third transformation could fell any and all receival experts. Even if he was unable to kill them, it would be enough to deal a fatal blow and incapacitate them. The person who's comprehended the way of the sword has already been heavily injured by me. Let's charge over immediately, Ku Mu said to the 5 people behind him through a communication technique. A sliver of joy flickered through his eyes as he charged forward. He planned on crossing the huge chasm and reaching the other side. The person singled out by the Spirit King is only a so-so. Even if you've comprehended the same way of the sword as the Spirit King, you're still a receival expert in the end. No one in the realm of receival is my opponent. Kumu was proud of himself. Having defeated Jian Chen, he felt extremely glorious. After all, he had just defeated a receival expert who practiced the same way of the sword as the Spirit King. Kumu immediately charged forward with the 5 receival experts behind him. Before him was a chasm, which had been formed by him and Jian Chen. Violet pulses of energy wreaked havoc as storms in the chasm. The energy storms had been caused when his secret technique clashed with Jian Chen's Ziying sword. However, when Kumu was about to step into the huge chasm, which was filled with storms of energy, with the 5 receival experts behind him, a powerful streak of violet light suddenly cleaved through the energy and shot toward Kumu with lightning-like speed. The surging sword chi had caused Kumu and the 5 receival experts behind him to narrow their eyes. Through the violet light, they could see the white-robed Jian Chen within the storms of energy. He was surrounded by the bright light, having crossed the chasm before them. He was protected by the light. He had arrived before the 6 of them aggressively and all by himself. This is impossible. Kumu was greatly taken aback. Jian Chen was unscathed, not in a heavily injured and incapacitated state or dead like he had imagined. Kumu found this difficult to accept. He refused to believe that there was someone at receival who could receive his 3rd transformation and emerge unscathed. In just a single moment, faster than a flash, the Ziying sword arrived before Kumu, radiating with surging sword chi. Even though Kumu was shocked, he was still a late receival expert who had experienced countless battles. He reacted instantly. Against the sword that approached him, he had no time to use a secret technique. All he could do was parry with his crescent blade. Ding! The sharp sword tip of the Ziying sword came in contact with the crescent blade. The sword flickered with a cold light and produced a clear sound. The strike contained Jian Chen's way of the sword. It contained a sliver of the power of laws. Even though the crescent blade in Kumu's hands was extraordinary, a deep slash still appeared on it after taking a strike from the Ziying sword, even though it was the same quality as a saint artifact. The hand Kumu wielded the blade with shot back as blood began to flow. The sound of bones breaking was barely audible, and the blade soon broke free from Kumu's grasp. It had been knocked away by Jian Chen's attack, sent out of the tunnel and into the vast, empty void outside. Kumu's face changed drastically. He was flustered, something that had rarely ever happened in his life. He immediately shot away as quickly as he could, approaching the 5 people behind him. Cold killing intent flickered through Jian Chen's eyes. This was the perfect opportunity to kill Kumu. If he could end the life of a receival expert from the world of Forsaken Saints, the pressure his world would face would slightly decrease. Jian Chen chased after him. The Ziying sword erupted with surging sword chi as it slashed toward Kumu's head with the power of the laws of the world. The 5 receival experts behind saw this attack and all revealed different expressions. They could obviously tell that Kumu could no longer face Jian Chen now that he had lost his weapon. They all struck out as hard as they could in an attempt to save him. Jian Chen's eyes exploded with light. He let his martial soul force radiate out without any restraint. A tremendous pressure that targeted the soul enveloped the 6 receival experts from the foreign world. Chapter 1472, Slaying a Receival Expert, 2. The moment Jian Chen's martial soul force had appeared, the collapse of the heavily damaged space slowed. Even the streams of energy that wreaked havoc calmed down, becoming much less brutal. The 6 receival experts from the foreign world all jerked violently when they were struck by the martial soul force. Their faces changed abruptly, and soon, the games they sent toward Jian Chen were filled with shock and disbelief. A soul attack. He can actually use a soul attack. Anna cried out. Even the master of their world, the Spirit King, did not possess a soul attack. Even with the entire world of Forsaken Saints in perspective, there was barely anyone who could use a soul attacks. However, without any exceptions, the soul attacks of the people from the world of Forsaken Saints were nowhere near as powerful as Jian Chen's soul attack, which could affect Origin Realm experts. Although Jian Chen currently possessed a soul that was equivalent to Returnance, he had only recently gained the power of martial soul force and had not found a corresponding technique to use it, so its force was reduced. It was nowhere as powerful as it was rumored. It could only be used to deal with Saint Emperors. It was unable to harm experts of the Origin Realm. As a result, the 6 of them were left unscathed even after suffering Jian Chen's martial soul force attack. Even though that was the case, it was still enough to make them pause, losing their best chance to save Ku Mu's life. Spurt. The Ziying sword stabbed into Ku Mu's forehead with lightning-like speed, piercing through his head. However, Ku Mu was an experienced fighter. He had lived through countless life-or-death battles, so his experience was rich. He had already abandoned his body and fled as just a soul when the Ziying sword came into contact with his skin. He flew toward Anna and the others as quickly as he could. Jian Chen sneered. Killing intent swelled in his sharp eyes. He stabbed out one more time, pursuing Ku Mu's soul. At this moment, the 5 other receival experts returned to their senses as well. 4 of them immediately radiated with surging presences to receive Jian Chen, stopping his attack from reaching Ku Mu's soul, while Anna quickly flew toward Ku Mu's soul in an attempt to protect it. Wild streams of energy were present everywhere in the tunnel. Having lost his body, Ku Mu was extremely weak. Even if he was a receival expert, he was unable to survive in the tunnel as a soul. None of you can save him. Jian Chen coldly informed them. The Ziying sword immediately grew brighter and transformed into 5 illusionary swords that would take on the 5 people. He began an intense battle against the 5 of them in the tunnel. Jian Chen was alone, but he had comprehended the way of the sword. His battle prowess was so extraordinary that he did not fall into a disadvantageous position while taking on 5 receival experts all by himself. Anna felt helpless due to Jian Chen's attacks and could no longer bother protecting Ku Mu's soul. Ku Mu, hurry up and return, Anna called out to Ku Mu. They all understood that attacking the Tian Yuan continent was no longer possible now that everything had gone south. They had underestimated Jian Chen's strength. Even though the Spirit King had given them a secret treasure to trap the Returnance expert, just Jian Chen himself was enough to stop the 5 of them. Not to mention, the other 3 Origin Realm experts outside the tunnel who had not taken part in the battle yet. Ku Mu said nothing. He carefully avoided the streams of energy in the tunnel as he flew in the direction he had come in. He knew that he could die at any moment and would only be safe if he returned to the world of Forsaken Saints. But an azure light appeared with a flash and crossed the chasm in the tunnel. It shot over with lightning-like speed, toward Ku Mu's soul. The 5 receival experts who were fighting against Jian Chen revealed drastically different expressions. One of them immediately cried out, "It's his other sword. God damn it, we forgot about his azure sword. Go save Ku Mu." However, it was already too late. The Qing Suo sword moved far too quickly, arriving before Ku Mu's soul in a single moment. Ku Mu was helpless against the Qing Suo sword without his body. The Qing Suo sword passed through his soul with surging sword qi under his terrified gaze. Arg! Ku Mu produced a chilling cry. At the end of it, his soul vanished from the tunnel, having been wiped out. The other 5 receival experts' expression all became extremely ugly after Ku Mu's death. They all felt heavy-hearted. Ku Mu was the strongest among the 6 of them, and even with the entire world of Forsaken Saints in perspective, there was probably no other receival expert who could beat him. Yet today, he had been slain so easily, which caused the 5 of them to jump in fright. The amount of time from the first clash against Jian Chen to his death was way too short. Retreat. One of the experts said with a heavy voice. He used his full strength to deliver a final attack on Jian Chen before immediately shooting back. The 4 other people did not hesitate either. They all lost interest in the battle and retreated with the receival expert. The 5 of them maintained a formation that could be used both defensively and offensively. They were careful about defending themselves against Jian Chen's pursuit as they fled in the direction they had come in as quickly as possible. Jian Chen hovered where he was as he silently watched the 5 of them travel away. He did not chase them because the tunnel had already become extremely damaged. Even Origin Realm experts would not be able to stay in it for too long, or they would be sucked out of the tunnel after the slightest carelessness and become lost in the endless void. Crack. 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 At this moment, a few deep sounds rang out. Near Jian Chen, a chasm several dozen meters long formed in the tunnel as the space there collapsed. The violet streams of energy became even more brutal. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen immediately turned around and flew back toward the Tian Yuan continent on his Ziying sword. On his way back, the tunnel shook more and more violently. The 300-meter-wide chasm had already expanded to 900 meters. Even with Jian Chen's strength, he needed to be very careful while crossing the region to avoid falling into the void. Jian Chen returned to the Tian Yuan continent safely. As soon as he emerged from the tunnel, the sea goddess, Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Feng Xiaotian, and Gui Haidao immediately hurried over to him. There were a total of 6 receival experts this time. I killed one of them and the 5 other retreated, Jian Chen said nonchalantly. However, the shock his nonchalant message brought to the 5 of them was extreme. He had faced off against 6 receival experts all by himself in the tunnel and not only emerged victorious but had managed to kill one of them as well. They all felt astounded by his battle prowess. Chapter 1473, Saving Xiao Ling. Yang Lai, Feng Xiaotian, Gui Haidao, and the sea goddess all sighed in surprise. From today on, they needed to re-evaluate Jian Chen's strength. Sigh. When I first saw my great-grandson on 3 Saint Island, he was only a saint ruler. Yang Lai sighed emotionally inside. Not very much time had passed, yet Jian Chen had already gone from a saint ruler to someone who could easily kill receival experts. He was so strong that he could rival Yang Lai's peak strength. The tunnel has collapsed completely. It should be quite a long journey from here to the world of Forsaken Saints, so the 5 receival experts who fled won't be able to make it back safely easily. The sea goddess stared deep into the chaotic tunnel ahead. Let's hope it's like that. The world of Forsaken Saints may have many Origin Realm experts, but losing 6 of them all of a sudden is still an extremely heavy loss. When they attack the Tian Yuan continent next time, their power will be slightly less than it would have been, Gui Haidao said with a deep voice. Jian Chen did not linger. Instead, he arrived before Xiao Ling. The giant 8 trigrams diagram from the azure disk glowed with a bright azure light, trapping Xiao Ling. Countless inscriptions would dance through the light, radiating with an ancient and mysterious presence. Xiao Ling had been immobilized within the 8 trigrams diagram. She was unable to do anything even with her strength as a returnance expert, unable to break free from the restraints of the disk. Her childish face was filled with terror. Tears rolled down her cheeks from her bright eyes. "Brother, save me, please save me. I'm so sacred." Xiao Ling turned to Jian Chen with some difficulty. Tears were pouring from her eyes as she sobbed. She was helpless. Jian Chen felt oddly pained due to how pitiful Xiao Ling seemed. He comforted her. "Xiao Ling, don't be scared. I'll save you very soon. Big brother, I can't move. Will I be taken away by those baddies? I'm so scared. I'm so scared," sobbed Xiao Ling in fear. She was panicking. "Don't be scared. With me here, no one can take you away. I've already chased away those baddies. They won't come again. Jian Chen informed her, using a soothing voice. He could not help but think back to the times when Xiaoling had protected him. Xiaoling, back when I was very weak, it was you who protected me. From today on, let me protect you. Once I possess strength that exceeds returnance, no one will be able to harm or hurt you at all, Jian Chen swore inside. He was not even a fraction of Xiaoling's age, but he had started to treat Xiaoling as his own younger sister long ago. Do any of you have any methods to save Xiaoling? Jian Chen turned to the 5 people behind him. The sea goddess and Tai Ta said nothing. This was the first time they had seen such a strange disc. Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian gathered around the disc and examined it for a while. Feng Xiaotian said, if you want to undo the disc, you need the secret technique to control it, but we don't possess that either. As a result, it's impossible to save Xiaoling immediately. However, all formations or treasures require a source of energy to remain operational. Without it, they cease to function. As a result, the only method we can use is to constantly attack the disc and exhaust all its energy. Jian Chen's eyes immediately lit up. He said, if that's the case, let's act immediately and save Xiaoling as soon as possible, just in case something happens if we tarry. Jian Chen, Xiao Jin, Tai Ta, the sea goddess, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian all stayed behind. They first moved Xiaoling into outer space before attacking the azure disk with all they had. The Saint Emperors that had come with Feng Xiaotian, Yang Lai, and Gui Haidao were tasked with the heavy responsibility of guarding the tunnel, just in case some other changes occurred. In the world of Forsaken Saints, the blood-red sun hung in the sky. It radiated with a demonic, red light, dyeing the entire world a blood-red. The world seemed ghastly. At very top of the world mountains in the center of the foreign world, the Spirit King stood with a dark sword on his back. His great figure seemed as steady as a mountain. As he stood there, he seemed like a pillar that was holding up the sky, acting like a spine that held up the world. He gave people a feeling that he was indomitable and immovable. 8 returnance experts formed a line behind him. They stood there silently, and behind them were 30 receival experts. Including the 8 returnance experts and the Spirit King, there are over 40 Origin Realm experts in the world of Forsaken Saints. 6 of them had gone to the Tianyuan continent, which was why only 39 Origin Realm experts were present. At this moment, all of them stared at the region before the Spirit King. The constantly distorting tunnel received the eager gazes of quite a few people. Suddenly, the tunnel violently pulsed and streams of wild energy surged into the blood-red world. At that moment, all the Origin Realm experts gathered there could see the tunnel rapidly collapse. The tunnel has collapsed. An extremely intense battle must have occurred up ahead. I wonder if Ku Mu and the others have successfully claimed the entrance and made preparations for the next wave, a returnance expert said from behind the Spirit King. Ku Mu and the others are the strongest group of receival experts our world possesses. They've even taken a secret treasure passed down through the ages with them, which is strong enough to trap a returnance expert. Without the threat of the returnance expert, it would be too easy for the 6 of them to take the entrance on the other side with their strength, said another returnance expert. He did not attach any importance to the strength of the Tianyuan continent. The Spirit King stood with his back to everyone. He stared fixedly at the tunnel before him and said nothing, but a gleam of light suddenly flashed through his eyes. He cried out, "Oh no!" The Spirit King charged into the tunnel with lightning-like speed, vanishing before everyone. The Origin Realm experts behind him all became stunned. Soon after, they seemed to notice something and their faces immediately became extremely ugly. The Spirit King had left quickly and returned quickly. In just a few seconds, he emerged from the tunnel with 2 people. It's Anna and Swer. They immediately recognized the two people in the Spirit King's hands and were immediately taken by surprise. At this moment, the two of them were a mess. They were disheveled and no longer appeared as glorious as before. However, there was joy from surviving in their eyes. "Thank you for saving us, Spirit King." Anna and Sword dropped to one knee. They spoke with gratitude evident in their voices. The Spirit King turned around and revealed his ordinary appearance. He stared at the two of them in interest and asked in a plain voice, "What's happened? Why have only the two of you returned? Where are the others?" Chapter 1474, Medium-Quality Immortal Artifact. Sorrow filled Anna and Swer's faces. Anna said with a heavy heart, "Spirit King, the 6 of us were stopped in the tunnel and have failed you. Not only did we fail to enter the other world, but we even failed to bring back the secret treasure that you bestowed on us." Ku Muz was killed. His soul was wiped out while the 3 others were swept into the cosmos. If it weren't for the Spirit King's assistance, the 2 of us would probably not have lived to see this world again. How did this happen? We understand the strength of the other world through and through. Other than the Returnance Expert, no one is a threat to the 6 of you. With the Returnance Expert trapped by the secret treasure bestowed upon you by the Spirit King, it should have been a piece of cake for the 6 of you to take over that world. How did such a drastic change happen? Do we still not fully understand that world's strength? Are there other experts hiding about? A few people among the 8 Returnance Experts immediately expressed their doubt. Their voices were filled with surprise. This major defeat had clearly taken all of them by surprise, completely exceeding anything they had imagined. The Spirit King also frowned slightly. He said, "Tell me what happened in detail." The 2 Receival Experts immediately narrated everything that they had experienced in the tunnel. The other Origin Realm Experts were not surprised at all when they heard that Duo Fu had trapped the Returnance Expert with the secret treasure. However, when they learned that the 6 of them were all obstructed by Jian Chen alone, all the Receival and Returnance Experts struggled to maintain their composure. "I never thought his strength would increase again in such a short amount of time. I miscalculated." The Spirit King gently sighed. He could not help but think about Jian Chen, who he had once fought in the outer space above the Tian Yuan continent. His deep eyes immediately brightened. "I never thought that this person would possess the battle prowess to take the 6 of you on all by himself without falling into a disadvantage. All this while managing to kill Ku Mu. He sure is worthy of being a person who the Spirit King pays attention to. He truly is rather capable," said a Returnance old man. Battle intent burned vigorously in his eyes, along with killing intent that he did not even try to contain. This time, Jian Chen had caused the world of Forsaken Saints to lose 4 Receival Experts. Even though they had over 40 Origin Realm Experts, 4 was still a large loss to them. The Spirit King stared at the tunnel for a while before saying, "The tunnel has completely collapsed now. It'll take several years before it fully recovers, but once it does recover, that will be the day when the 8 of you enter. Let's go. The next time will be the time our world completely conquers the other world." The other Receival and Returning Experts all rejoiced inside. They were filled with great eagerness, tempted to enter the other world right now. Their race had waited just far too long for this day to arrive. Jian Chen and the others spent several days in outer space before wasting all the energy of the disk, disabling its powers and saving Xiaoling. As soon as Xiaoling broke free, she threw herself at Jian Chen and broke into tears. She was pitiful. Xiaoling had never experienced what she had gone through over the past few days, so she had been terrified the entire time since she was still childish. The Sea Goddess, Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian all silently watched Jian Chen as he carried the sobbing Returnance Expert. Mixed feelings filled their eyes as they all sighed inside. Jian Chen comforted Xiaoling while examining the azure disc in his hand. The disc was only the size of a hand and made from unknown materials. A miniature diagram of 8 trigrams was carved onto it, and a mysterious and ancient presence flowed through it as an extremely weak azure glow gave off light. This disc sure is quite the treasure to be able to trap returnance experts and be able to resist several days' worth of attack from us before running out of energy. At the very least, I've never heard of such a powerful treasure on the Tianyuan continent after all these years, Jian Chen mumbled. Suddenly, he seemed to discover something. His eyes suddenly narrowed before he sighed in surprise. This disc can actually automatically absorb the energy of the world to replenish its supply after it's been completely used up. This is, Jian Chen's eyes lit up. He stared at the disc as an odd light filled his eyes. If only we could use this disc, then the next time the foreign world attacks, we would be able to return the favor to one of their returnance experts. It would weaken their strength. Yang Lai shook his head and sighed. Pity filled his face. He understood this but did not know of a method to use the disc, which he found to be a great pity. Jian Chen's eyes rapidly darkened as a result. He also understood that the disc was no different than scrap metal in his hands if he did not know of a method to use it. At this moment, Jian Chen's azulate swords trembled. At the same time, the sword spirit's voices rang out in his head. This is a medium-grade immortal artifact and is separated with yin and yang. Master, if you give us some time, we might be able to find a method to use it. Jian Chen was very interested. His eyes lit up once more. He then said to the people around him, I'll keep this disc to study for a few days to see if I can find a method to use it so that we can use it as a weapon of our own. Jian Chen's suggestion did not raise any objections, so he held on to the disc. Afterward, Tai Ta, the sea goddess, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Shaotian all returned to where they had come from. Jian Chen arrived above the ruins of Mercenary City with Xiao Ling, calming her down after a great deal of effort. He could not return to Flame City since he needed to guard the tunnel, so he carved a cave in a mountain nearby and continued to revive Emperor armaments. Jian Chen had already left the azure disc to the sword spirits to study, hoping they could obtain a method to use it. In the blink of an eye, 1.5 years had passed since the 6 receival experts had attempted to invade the world. The Tianyuan continent had been relatively peaceful. Jian Chen revived all of the Emperor armaments and King armaments, so there were over 600 Saint Emperor puppets and over 8,000 Saint King's puppets in the artifact space. If he included the number revived by the President and Grand Elder, then the total amount of Saint King puppets would be approaching 10,000. These puppets will serve as the core force when stopping the world of Forsaken Saints from invading. Jian Chen sighed emotionally as he gazed at the large swathe of Saint King and Saint Emperor puppets. There was hope in his voice. He was finally somewhat confident that they could stop the foreign world's armies now that he had so many puppets. There are still quite a few Origin Realm experts in the foreign world. I can only use my own strength to stop them. If I can find a method to use martial soul force and truly demonstrate its might, I'll be able to handle all the receival and returnance experts from the world of Forsaken Saints by myself, Jian Chen thought. Without any hesitation, he entered seclusion once more and began to study martial soul force. Chapter 1475, Returning to the Sea Realm. Jian Chen devoted himself to the study of martial soul force. He hoped to find a method to use in the shortest amount of time possible so that he could push its power to the limits. To Jian Chen, martial soul force was a huge treasure box. He possessed the treasure box, but he lacked the key to open it. If he could find the key and open the treasure box, he would be able to kill receival experts easily. Even if he was facing a returnance expert or several of them, he could heavily injure all of them in a single moment. This was because his soul had already reached the returnance realm. According to Fairy Hao Yu's description, it was possible for him to demonstrate a similar prowess. At that time, the only person who would be able to threaten him from the foreign world would be the Spirit King. Martial soul force was the most direct way to power up Jian Chen right now. It was easier than strengthening the way of the sword or his chaotic body. Although he already possessed the azulate swords, every step on the path of the way of the sword was extremely difficult to take. Even with the comprehension T, it would be very difficult for him to reach a similar level of comprehension as the Spirit King, even if he made all of the T. If he could reach the same level of comprehension as the Spirit King, just the way of the sword would not be enough for him to face the Spirit King. Martial soul force, which specifically attacked the soul, was his greatest weapon. With his soul at returnance, his martial soul force might not have been enough to injure the Spirit King, who was one cultivation level higher, but it could still cause a certain effect. In an intense battle, it was often a slight careless mistake that would turn the situation around. As Jian Chen busied himself with martial soul force, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian did not sit around either. With the three of them in charge, they gathered all the saint emperors in the world in waves and taught them formations from the saints' world, guiding and demonstrating them. These formations were only part of the lowest level in the saints' world, but they easily surpassed Saint Tier on the Tian Yuan continent. When several saint emperors created a formation, they were unable to harm receival experts but could keep them trapped for a few days without a problem at all. The power of the formation would increase when more people took part as well. As Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian appeared before the saint emperors more often, their true identities were gradually revealed to the experts of the four races. The status of the protector clans immediately increased as a result, becoming peak organizations only second to the Flame Mercenaries, which were personally led by Jian Chen. On the Beast God continent, the White Tiger remained on the 99th floor of the Beast God Hall, accepted its legacy. The White Tiger had no idea what was happening outside. The current Beast God continent remained under Zhangqiong's control. Even with the appearance of many new saint emperors, they were still unable to shake his position. Tai Ta boldly sat on the throne within the War God Hall on the Wasteland continent. He shone brightly with light, mixing with the light of the Divine Hall. He seemed to be undergoing some type of fusion. The presence from Tai Ta was clearly much more powerful than a few years ago. His strength had rapidly increased over the years. Even though his strength still remained at receival, if it was measured using the standard of the Tian Yuan continent, he had already reached late receival. His battle prowess was even greater. He was now able to take on returnance experts. If only I could fully control this War God Hall. The toughness of this Divine Hall just shocks me. All I need to do is place this Divine Hall in front of the tunnel and block then entrance. Then the people from the foreign world wouldn't be able to come over. It's just a pity that I can only use the power of the Divine Hall to assist my cultivation due to my current strength. Even Uncle Ergens could have avoided death with this Divine Hall. All he needed to do was hide in here. Even if the winged tiger god from ancient times had surpassed the limitations of a lifespan and could live as long as the world remained, he would still not be able to smash through this Divine Hall in a short period of time. It's just that pride of the warring gods stopped Uncle Ergens from hiding in here, making him more willing to die in battle instead. Tai Ta sat on the throne as he murmured to himself. After becoming the war god of the 100 races, Tai Ta seemed to have undergone a baptism, making him even more mature. Even though he was still the same, his mind had morphed. He was no longer naive and sometimes stupid like before. The great elder of Mercenary City, Tianjian, had still not appeared. He continued to refine the supreme Divine Hall that Mo Tianyun had left behind. The Divine Hall was extremely special since Tianjian needed this much time to refine it even with his strength as a Saint Emperor. The President and the Grand Elder of the Radiant Saint Master Union remained in seclusion as well. They used their powers as Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters to revive the ruler and king armaments Jian Chen had left with them, helping the Tian Yuan continent become a little more powerful in preparation for when the world of Forsaken Saints attacked. Regardless of whether an expert was from the Tian Yuan continent, the Beast God continent, the Wasteland continent, or the Sea Realm, they were all making preparations for the upcoming battle. Only weaker fighters, who would not be of any use in the battle, continued their easygoing lives. Very few of these fighters understood the strength of the foreign world. They only knew that their world had managed to stop an invasion from the world of forsaken saints and had killed several hundred of their saint emperors, attaining a glorious battle record. As a result, they believed that the threat of the foreign world no longer existed. As time went on, their impression of the foreign world gradually faded from the shock, horror, and so on to just a memory. In the end, the foreign world became a simple topic of conversation they would have over a meal. In the blink of an eye, another 5 years passed. It had been 6.5 years since Jian Chen had fended off the foreign receival experts. During that period of time, Jian Chen had completely vanished. He had remained in seclusion within the cave near Mercenary City. Other than spending the first 1.5 years reviving saint weapons, Jian Chen spent this entire time studying martial soul force. Unfortunately, he might have overestimated his comprehension abilities or underestimated the wonders of martial soul force. Not only had he failed to find a true method to use martial soul force within those 5 years, but he had even wasted quite a few 5th-grade comprehension tea leaves. Martial soul force is overly wondrous and mysterious. I require an extremely long amount of time to deduce a method to use it. This is something that cannot be achieved in just a few short years. The collapsed tunnel is reforming right now. It may not have completely stabilized, but within 3 years at most, returnance experts will be able to pass through. Jian Chen opened his eyes in the gloomy cave. They glowed like 2 glistening gems. 3 years. 3 years at most. I can't keep wasting this valuable time on martial soul force, Jian Chen softly murmured before standing up. He gazed in the direction of the distant sea realm. Maybe the only method for me to increase my strength is to go to the sea realm, Jian Chen said with a deep voice before leaving the cave he had stayed in for 6 years. He headed toward the sea realm. Chapter 1476, Into the Sea of Despair. The sea realm was located at the bottom of the ocean. It was a world enveloped by an extremely vast barrier. This barrier separated the sea water from the sea realm. The barrier was the sky of the sea realm and created an empty space within the water. This space was the world of the sea realm as well as the territory of the sea race. The sea race was divided into the outer sea and inner sea. The inner sea was the world within the barrier while the outer sea was the region outside, filled with seawater. There were also members of the sea race in the outer sea as well as some deep-sea beasts who did not possess intelligence. However, most of the sea race outside had not taken a human form yet and were species that possessed huge bodies. It was not that they could not enter the inner sea, but that they were restricted by their huge bodies and found living in the sea realm extremely inconvenient. The outer sea was more convenient for them, so they remained outside and rarely entered the inner sea. This was why very few sea races appeared in their original form in the inner sea. At this moment, a resplendent streak of violet light tore through the air within the barrier. It moved extremely quickly, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. This streak of violet was Jian Chen. He stood on the Ziying sword with the Qing Suo sword on his back. He stared at the familiar land below as his face was filled with reminiscence. He expanded his soul. With his soul at returnance, he could envelope the entire sea realm without much effort at all. Although the sea realm was not any smaller than the Tianyuan continent, Jian Chen could see everything within as he stood on the Ziying sword, aside from the divine realm and the sea of despair. Through the senses of his soul, Jian Chen saw the sea goddess hall, the serpent god hall, the heaven spirit hall, as well as the heavily injured hall masters of the latter 2 halls. At the same time, he could see the prosperous turtle clan. The current clan had truly returned to its former glory. Their clansmen had already exceeded 100,000, and besides them, there were several tens of thousand warriors that had joined or been recruited by the turtle clan. Even without Jian Chen, the current turtle clan had become one of the most powerful organizations in the sea realm, only second to the 3 great halls. In the center of the clan, Jian Chen saw a 300-meter-tall statue. It was a depiction of himself and seemed very lifelike. Many clansmen and people that had joined the Turtle Clan knelt in devotion before the statue. All of their gazes were filled with burning faith, as if the statue was their religion, their god. Behind it was a tower several hundred meters tall. The tower was completely constructed from grand quality crystal, so the tower radiated pure and surging water-attributed energy. The tower was only a few meters shorter than the statue. When Jian Chen's soul penetrated the tower, he could clearly see a Niden radiating with the presence of the Turtle Clan enshrined on the highest floor. Jian Chen's feelings could not help but become mixed when he saw the Niden. The Niden had caused him to think of the past, involuntarily recalling the moment when he had first come to the sea realm and received it from the sea goddess, as well as all the moments after, from meeting the Grand Elder of the Turtle Clan to becoming the Turtle Clan's ruler. Jian Chen had no ties to the Turtle Clan, but everything had happened due to the Niden the sea goddess had gifted him. Huge changes occurred and, in the end, a new age of glory descended upon the Turtle Clan. Even the sea goddess had not foreseen this. I wonder if Kaya is still alive or not. Was the catastrophe of her clan caused by the Octaterra cultivation method I gifted her? If that's really the case, I've brought disaster onto her. Jian Chen knew about the first member of the sea race he had met after coming to the sea realm. He could not help but gently sigh inside. When he had gifted Kaya the cultivation method, he had wanted to find a successor for the Octaterra Emperor so that his legacy would never end, as well as help out Kaya. After all, Jian Chen knew very few people in the sea realm back then. Aside from Xiaofan, there was only Kaya. Jian Chen arrived outside the Sea of Despair with complicated and melancholic feelings. He gazed into the distance and only saw that the Sea of Despair was completely obscured by a wall of mist that connected the ground and the sky. The Sea of Despair was an extremely special place. It was filled with a mysterious power that stopped all senses of the soul from working. Even Jian Chen's soul at returnance was unable to penetrate the mist. Jian Chen gazed into the mist as he stood outside. He could not help but think of the immortal emperor's flesh that was scattered across the region, as well as the Inata Grand Prime's Inata Tower from the saint's world. His eyes immediately lit up with determination and anticipation. This was the determination to enter the Inata Tower and the anticipation to obtain it. Jian Chen took a single step. He crossed several hundred meters in that single step, and 3 steps later, he disappeared into the mist. He had entered the Sea of Despair. Jian Chen strode through the Sea of Despair. He took each step firmly and confidently, without any fear. He was no longer as careful as he had been when he had first come in with Yadrium. Instead, he charged forward, full of confidence. The mist before Jian Chen was nothing ordinary. Not only did it obscure Jian Chen's vision, but even his soul was rendered useless. As he moved through the mist, some specks of light, like the eyes of ghosts, gradually appeared behind Jian Chen. They hid in the mist as they followed Jian Chen, increasing in number. When the pairs of eyes reached over 30, they finally ran out of patience. They all surged toward Jian Chen and attacked him. Jian Chen did not seem to discover the eyes behind him. He took each step confidently. The eyes moved extremely fast, arriving behind Jian Chen in the blink of an eye. They wanted to penetrate Jian Chen's body. Mist lingered around them. However, when the eyes reached 3 inches away from Jian Chen, they suddenly produced a chilling shriek before dissolving into mist. Soon afterward, the other eyes all collided with Jian Chen. Immediately, many shrieks rang out. All the eyes that had attacked Jian Chen had been reduced to mist in a single moment. Jian Chen did not look back at all, as if he did not hear the shrieks. He continued through the mist step by step. He seemed nonchalant. At a closer glance, a thin layer of light, created from his way of the sword, hung around him. Chapter 1477, through the mist there were many vicious spirits in the mist. Jian Chen came across over 1,000 of them along his journey. The spirits ranged from weak saint rulers to saint kings, even a few saint kings at great perfection. But the spirits were unable to harm Jian Chen at all. They could not even slow him down. A faint glow permeated his surroundings. He used the way of the sword to protect him, so even spirits at the great perfection of Saint King were unable to touch him. As soon as they came in contact with the glow, they were immediately grinded into a white mist, which merged into the surrounding mist. At this moment, Jian Chen suddenly came to a stop. The next moment, he suddenly vanished. When he had appeared again, he was 100 meters away. The space where he stood trembled before recovering in just a single moment, becoming as calm as before. It was still enveloped by mist, but at a closer glance, the mist was slightly different than before. The space in the Sea of Despair was extraordinarily unstable and would randomly teleport anything in it from time to time. Any region could suddenly transport a person to another location within the sea realm. Jian Chen advanced mindlessly through the Sea of Despair. When he had first come here in search of the Sea Goddess Divine Hall, he was able to maintain a straight course because of the Abyssal Crystal's guidance. However, he had not come in search of the Divine Hall this time but the Inata Tower. He did not know where it was, and in the Sea of Despair it was almost impossible to find his bearings. Jian Chen could only try his luck. The Inata Tower was the famed god artifact of the Inata Grand Prime from the Saints' World. Even with the entire Saints' World in perspective, the Inata Grand Prime ranked among the top 3 of all Grand Primes. In the past, only the Grand Prime of the Warring Gods could truly keep the Inata Grand Prime at bay. Meanwhile, it was extremely likely that the Inata Tower possessed all the wealth of the Inata Grand Prime, which really tempted Jian Chen. Any single item from a Grand Prime would probably be enough to overshadow everything Jian Chen had gained from the Xuanhuan microcosm. As a result, Jian Chen planned on taking the Inata Tower to raise his strength as quickly as possible during this crucial period of time. The Inata Tower possessed an artifact spirit. If the tower was still in perfect condition, Jian Chen would have never had these thoughts, but not only had the tower been heavily damaged by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, but it was also covered by his seals, preventing the tower from recovering after all these years and forcing it to grow weaker. The sword spirits said in the past that I could only enter the Inata Tower after I had reached the 7th layer of the chaotic body. The 5th layer of the chaotic body is at the 3rd heavenly layer of Saint Emperor. I guess the 6th layer should be around the 6th or 7th heavenly layer, while the 7th layer is at Receival. My chaotic body may still only be at the 5th layer, but my true strength is no less than Receival with my comprehension of the way of the sword and the azulate swords. I possess the strength equivalent to the battle prowess of the 7th layer, so I should be able to enter the Inata Tower now, Jian Chen thought. He was filled with anticipation. The requirements for entering the Inata Tower and absorbing the Yinyang Saint Rock were different. The Inata Tower required battle prowess, which Jian Chen had already attained, while the Yinyang Saint Rock had nothing to do with battle prowess since it was absorbing the Supreme Yang Qi and Supreme Yin Qi. He needed his chaotic force and body at a corresponding level to withstand it. Suddenly, the mist before Jian Chen began to violently surge. A pair of eyes appeared before Jian Chen. The eyes were extremely bright, glistening like gemstones. They were particularly eye-catching in the mist. A Saint Emperor vicious spirit. Jian Chen's eyes lit up as he stared at the eyes in interest. This was the first time he had come across a Saint Emperor vicious spirit after entering the Sea of Despair. Vaguely, he could even see the consolidated body of the vicious spirit. This spirit was clearly not the same as the one he and Yadrium had met before. It did not hesitate at all when it saw Jian Chen, immediately roaring at him. Jian Chen's advance did not slow. He used 2 of his fingers as a sword, and a sword chi that was just over a meter long immediately condensed. It shone with dazzling light as sword chi permeated the surroundings. The mist in the surroundings actually thinned. Jian Chen gently slashed at the vicious spirit charging toward him with his sword qi. The spirit immediately produced a chilling shriek when it was hit, having been cleaved in half. The sword qi clearly caused it great damage. Its consolidated body of mist immediately became extremely thin. When Jian Chen slashed out a second time, the vicious spirit collapsed after emitting another chilling shriek. It dispersed as mist. Jian Chen advanced through the sea of despair aimlessly. He had completely lost his sense of direction. He would encounter teleporting space from time to time and would avoid them most of the time, preventing him from being sent away. However, Jian Chen was unable to dodge a few instances since the teleported region was relatively larger and would end up in a random area within the Sea of Despair. There was no day or night in Sea of Despair, so it was impossible to sense the passing of time. Jian Chen did not know how long he had traveled either. He killed countless vicious spirits and had even come across quite a few Saint Emperor spirits, but they were all slain by him. Jian Chen came across quite a few regions that housed the immortal emperor's remains. Even though they had been there for countless years, the blood had not dried and had never ran out of life. Even with Jian Chen's current strength, he felt shocked from the terrifying killing intent hidden within the remains. He was unable to approach them at all. At this moment, the space before Jian Chen suddenly opened up. The obscuring mist vanished, and he had arrived in a clear world. He seemed to have entered a whole different world altogether. The thinner the mist was in the Sea of Despair, the more dangerous it was. However, the region where Jian Chen stood did not have any mist at all for a radius of several dozen meters. However, Jian Chen rejoiced when he saw this region. His eyes lit up in a single moment because he had come here before. This was the place where the Inata Tower stood. "I've finally found it," Jian Chen murmured. Finding this place in the disorienting Sea of Despair was extremely difficult. Chapter 1478, Into the Inata Tower. Jian Chen stepped forward with the azulate swords on his back, traveling through the flat land. He became cautious after arriving in this huge region without many mist. He was no longer as careless as before. Within the mist, there were only the vicious spirits that he needed to pay attention to. Some of the more powerful spirits were enough to threaten Saint Emperors or even kill them. However, no matter how powerful those spirits were, they were unable to pose any harm to Origin Realm experts because the strongest were only Saint Emperors. However, this region without mist possessed something terrifying enough to kill Origin Realm experts. This was where the Inata Tower stood. Jian Chen advanced over 30 meters into the region and finally became stern. He stared ahead as light flickered in his eyes. Several dozen kilometers away from him, an ancient tower stood silently. The tower was several hundred meters tall and seemed extremely ordinary. Nothing really stood out besides the sword slashes that covered the structure. Each sword slash was extremely deep, engraved into the tower, causing the ordinary-looking tower to appear extremely damaged and ruined. At the same time, each slash seemed to flicker with light and release a powerful sword chi from time to time. The sword chi was so powerful that it was enough to overwhelm the world. Without any doubt, it possessed the power to destroy worlds. Even Jian Chen's heart leaped in fright when he sensed the sword chi. Jian Chen stopped where he was. He stood there and stared at the tower for a while before sucking in a deep breath. He slowly calmed down before walking over confidently. Suddenly, the damaged tower began to tremble. As the tower trembled, the space around it rippled. It violently shook, obscuring the tower. At the same time, visible waves of destructive power rapidly launched into the surroundings. Wherever the waves passed, the space would wildly distort. If it were not for the fact that the space where the tower stood was extraordinarily tough, far tougher than the space in the sea realm, probably just the ripples would have been enough for the entire region of space to collapse. Jian Chen's gaze became extremely sharp. When he had come here with Yadrium before, the two of them had been forced away by these ripples. Yet now, faced against the same ripples, he did not flee at all. With a thought, the Ziying sword flew into his hand as a streak of violet light. He stabbed at the ripples with the swords. The entire region was dyed violet as soon as he struck out. A dazzling glow flickered on the sword as it radiated with surging sword chi. Jian Chen had fused his comprehension of the way of the sword into the attack, so it possessed the power of laws. The strike possessed power no weaker than late receival. Even late receival experts would pale if they had to receive the attack. Bang! The Ziying sword collided against the ripples with a shocking force, immediately erupting with a deep sound. An even more terrifying ripple of energy exploded, surging into the surroundings as a storm of destruction. It caused the earth to sink and crack, but when the energy surged toward the mist in the sky, it dispersed without getting close, as if it was a whole different world here, completely separate from the region of mist. Jian Chen's body jerked violently, but he remained where he was. He did not stagger back at all. However, his feet had sunk into the extremely hard earth. At that moment, the entire ground several dozen kilometers away from Jian Chen sank 3 meters into the ground. The earth became even tougher than before, akin to stone. The slashes on the tower suddenly began to glow after the tower emitted that attack. All 108 slashes on the tower glowed with a dazzling light. 36 illusionary swords appeared and slowly revolved around the tower, suppressing it. The tower shook constantly and deep sounds would ring out from time to time, as if it was resisting the seal. However, it failed to produce a second wave. A while later, the tower gradually trembled less violently before stopping altogether. The tower recovered its deathly silence from before, standing there without moving at all. Jian Chen stared at the tower. He held the Ziying sword in his hand, which was still enshrouded by a violet glow. When the tower calmed down, Jian Chen began to approach it once more. The tower was heavily damaged, but its artifact spirit was still present. The tower was still able to display unimaginable might while in the artifact spirit's control. Thus, it was impossible to approach even with the strength of an origin realm expert. Even reciprocity experts would find it difficult to stay alive, but the tower was currently sealed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt slashes, limiting the might it could display. Killing Jian Chen had become rather difficult. The Inata tower no longer moved, as if it had completely settled down. Even when Jian Chen arrived at its main entrance, it did not react at all. Jian Chen gazed up at the damaged tower from the main entrance. The tower was covered in a total of 108 sword slashes. Each slash was several meters deep and they continued to shine even now. They emitted surging sword chi as 36 illusionary swords revolved around the structure in the air. They seemed to possess trajectories that conformed to the world, exhibiting the power of laws. Jian Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. He had secretly raised his vigilance to his limit. The tower was quiet, but the operation of the seals told Jian Chen that the tower was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. The door to the first layer of the tower had already been damaged. The holes were patched up with a barrier condensed from powerful energy, creating a slightly illusory patchwork. It seemed almost tangible. At this moment, Jian Chen suddenly slashed out. The Ziying sword collided with the door, which immediately erupted with a deafening boom. The Inata tower stood there unmoving while the damaged door did not even shake. However, the glow from the patched-up regions darkened slightly. Chapter 1479, The World Within the Tower. Jian Chen stared at the parts of the door condensed from energy with great interest. His eyes shone extremely brightly as he murmured, with the toughness of the Inata tower, if the main entrance was fine, I would not be able to enter no matter what, even if it's unable to counterattack. Yet now, as soon as he finished speaking, Jian Chen cleaved at the door with his sword once again. With a boom, the portion condensed from energy darkened once more. Jianchen finally got through the damaged door after more than a dozen attacks. Jianchen carefully passed through a crack in the door and entered the interior of the tower. Jianchen felt like he had arrived in a whole different world the moment he stepped into the tower. The ground was barren, without any signs of life, and filled with the presence of death. The sky was gloomy and expanded as far as the eye could see. Is this the interior of the Anata Tower? Jianchen gazed at the boundless world and could not help but feel shocked. He soon attempted to expand his soul to observe the place, but he discovered that his soul was suppressed even more within the tower. Jianchen looked around diligently for a while. He actually sensed no signs of danger within the world, so he just ended up riding the Qing Suo sword in the sky while communicating with the sword spirits. There are a total of 9 floors within the Anata Tower. Each floor is composed of a vast world. Normally, the tunnel to the floor above should be in the center of the floor, but the artifact spirit is still present and can control everything within the tower. Under its influence, it possesses the power to hide the passage to the next floor or move it to a completely new place, Ziying explained to Jianchen. This was the first time they had come inside the Anata Tower, but they knew quite a lot about it. The Anata Grand Prime was an extremely famed figure in the Saints' world as well as one of the 3 strongest Grand Primes. The Grand Exalts of the Immortals world would have obviously investigated the Anata Grand Prime. If the artifact spirit really has hidden the way up, wouldn't it be almost impossible to find in this tremendous world? After all, I can't use my soul to search here, Jianchen frowned. Master, we've already entered the tower, yet the artifact spirit still hasn't appeared. This explains one thing, which is that it is far weaker than us, where even when it's in its own territory, it's not confident it could deal with us. In its current state, perfectly hiding the way up within the damaged tower is no longer possible. We will discover it when we approach it, said Ziying. Jianchen rode the Qing Suo sword through the first floor of the tower. The Ziying sword hovered above his head, ready to strike out at any moment. Jianchen had secretly filled every inch of his body with chaotic force as well, pushing his chaotic body to the limits. Outside, he was surrounded by the glow of the way of the sword. At this moment, Jianchen narrowed his eyes. He stared ahead. Only darkness appeared before him, and within the dark world, space was extremely unstable. Huge cracks would appear one after another, and each one was thousands of meters long. They were large enough to swallow huge beasts, and they even emitted a suction force. However, an illusionary, 30,000-meter-long sword hovered within the dark world. It flickered with light as sword chi surged from it. 1,000-meter-long spatial cracks would pass through the sword from time to time, but it was unable to damage the illusionary sword at all. The cracks did not even manage to shake it. This is one of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords, the Sword of Mortality. It's just sword chi left behind by the Sword of Mortality. The Sword of Mortality boasts being able to sever an immortal's foundation, thrusting mortality onto them and preventing them from attaining immortality ever again, explained Qing Suo. Jianchen stared at the huge projection of the Sword of Mortality. Even though it was formed from just a single strand of sword chi, it seemed everlasting, like it would not disperse even if the world ended. It seemed like the illusionary sword was eternal. Jianchen was shocked. He admired the terrifying strength of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Just a single sword chi left behind could still remain so terrifyingly powerful even after so much time. Jianchen struggled to imagine just how terrifying he actually was in his prime. This is the end of a side of the first floor. Originally, the first floor was not so small, but the space ahead has been obliterated by the sword chi of the Sword of Mortality, Ziying said. Jianchen stared at the sword. Even though it was created from a single strand of sword chi, it possessed a supreme will within the sword god realm. To his pity, he knew that his comprehension of the way of the sword would rapidly increase even if he could just understand a fraction of the will, but his comprehension was just far too low and his foundations were not firm. He did not possess the ability to comprehend the will of a sword god. After a moment of silence, Jian Chen suppressed the temptation to attempt to comprehend the will. He left in frustration and pity, flying off in another direction. Jian Chen soon arrived at another boundary of the floor. A destroyed space of darkness blocked his way again, and a huge sword hovered within that space as well. It was 30,000 meters long and radiated with a terrifying pressure. The dark space before him used to be a part of the vast world on the first floor, but it had been obliterated by the shocking sword Qi in the end. This is the sword of reincarnation, also one of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt swords. It possesses the power of samsara, able to push immortals into an endless cycle of rebirth, never able to break free. The voices of the sword spirits rang through Jian Chen's head. Jian Chen's interest was immediately piqued. In the world of the first floor, he had already traveled in 2 directions, and when he reached as far as he could go, he had found the illusory figure of a sword. He wondered if the other 2 directions possessed swords as well. Jian Chen did not stay for too long and immediately flew off in the one direction and then the other. His thoughts were confirmed. Just as he had expected, the boundaries of the other 2 directions possessed the sword Qi of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt as well. Each strand of sword Qi was extremely terrifying, projecting a sword that was 30,000 meters long. They seemed eternal even after so much time. The Sword of Slaughter is the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's main sword for killing, as well as the one he used most frequently during his growth. Countless immortals from the immortals' world, great demons from the demons' world, and experts from the saints' world that have been felled by this sword. The Sword of Severance is the strongest sword among the 4. This sword specializes in attacking the soul and is able to sever the souls of people while leaving their bodies unscathed. Even the apex immortal exalts feared the might of this sword. Mortality, reincarnation, slaughter, and soul severance are the 4 divine swords of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Each sword has been fused with a way comprehended by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, allowing the 4 swords to possess their own unique abilities. Coupled with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's comprehension at the realm of Sword God, the 4 swords could erupt with unimaginable might. If the 4 swords formed a formation, their power would be even more shocking. The Inata Tower is very powerful as well, truly worthy of being the Inata Grand Prime's famed treasure. Even the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt was unable to destroy it, only managing to suppress and seal it. Ziying and Qing Suo gave one explanation after another. Their voices were filled with admiration and amazement. Chapter 1480, Spirit of the Inata Tower, Immortal Exalt. Sword God. Jian Chen clenched his fists as anticipation filled his eyes. The power of the 4 sword Qis left behind by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had completely taken him aback, leaving an unforgettable impression on him. Jian Chen displayed an emotion he rarely showed: desire. A desire for strength, the desire to become an immortal exalt and a sword god. If I possessed enough strength right now, the world of forsaken saints wouldn't be able to pose a threat to the Tianyuan continent at all. Not only can great strength be for protection, but it can also be used to protect those close to me as well as my home. In this world, if you do not have enough strength, you are nothing. You won't even be able to control your own life, Jian Chen thought. He secretly made up his mind to become powerful like the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. This was not only his desire as a fighter but also because he wanted to see what the other worlds were like up above. Jian Chen seemed to think of something and asked, Ziying, Qing Suo, the Azulite swords are like the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, the strongest god artifacts of the Immortals world. Each sword belonging to the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt has been imbued with his comprehension of a way, which is why the 4 swords possess unique abilities. You stand with the 4 swords, so what unique abilities do you have? The Ziying sword has reached the limits of supreme Yang force in the cosmos, which is also known as Grand Yang force. He can burn countless worlds and even burn the laws of the worlds themselves. The Qing Suo sword has reached the limits of supreme Yin force, which is also known as Grand Yin force. In a single instance, it can freeze worlds and everything in it and even stop time. If the swords are fused and the supreme Yang force and supreme Yin force is fused, the fusion will create true chaotic force, which is even more powerful. It can annihilate everything in the world, but unfortunately, Qing Suo and I were heavily injured in the war back then and still haven't recovered, so we're unable to use supreme Yang force and supreme Yin force. We only possess the abilities of sword spirits, said Ziying. Master, even if Ziying and I can use supreme Yin force and supreme Yang force, the quality of the two swords right now is not enough to endure their power. They can only withstand it after they've reached supreme quality as immortal artifacts, and coupled with the fact that the two of us were formed from a strand of Yin Qi and Yang Qi that had separated from chaos and gained intelligence, the supreme Yin force and supreme Yang force are our vital energies, so overusing them will injure us. As for the sword fusion mentioned, it's best that you never attempt it, Master. In order to kill the Grand Prime of the Warring Gods, former Master used the fusion and erupted with devastating power. Although he successfully slew the Warring God Grand Prime in the end, he suffered the backlash of the fusion as well. The backlash was extremely terrifying, and even as one of the 5 great immortal exalts, former Master could not endure it and died. The azulate swords that were of the same quality as the Anata Tower and the 4 swords of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt were destroyed as a result. Ziying and I suffered unimaginable injuries, only leaving behind spirits. If it were not for the fact that we originated as strands of Yin and Yang Qi, which are impossible to destroy, we would have been vaporized the moment the swords were destroyed back then, Qing Suo said sternly. She still felt lingering fear when she thought back to what had happened back then. Supreme quality immortal artifacts, Jian Chen softly murmured and could not help but frown. He had worked tirelessly to collect the materials for forging the azulate swords, yet the swords he had fused in the end were barely mid-quality immortal artifacts. Between mid-quality and supreme quality was a high quality, so it was impossible for him to find such high-quality materials even if he scoured this entire world. The materials required to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts rarely appeared in this world or could never appear at all. If I want to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts, I must go to the Saints' world or the Immortals' world for materials. At the same time, my chaotic flames will definitely have to be extremely pure in order to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts, so forging them right now is still a little too distant for me. However, once I do forge them and Ziying and Qing Suo recover some strength, the supreme Yang force and supreme Yin force will definitely strengthen me, Jian Chen thought. He stared at the world as the light in his eyes flickered. This Anata Tower was left behind by the Anata Grand Prime, so it definitely should contain his wealth. I wonder if I can find some materials for forging supreme quality immortal artifacts here. However, I better deal with the matter at hand first and obtain this tower as soon as possible. When his thoughts had just ran to their conclusion, the azulate swords suddenly began to revolve around each other before shooting off into the sky. They resonated with a clear thrum, which echoed through the surroundings. A gleam of light flashed through Jian Chen's eyes, and he suddenly raised his head. His eyes shone with interest. His gaze was sharp like swords. This time, the 2 swords had flown off by themselves and not because he wanted them to. The 2 swords moved extremely quick, piercing through the clouds in a single moment. Their bright lights illuminated the region, causing the thick clouds in the sky to rapidly disperse and reveal the scorching sun above. The 2 swords shot toward the sun. However, the sun and the sky suddenly released an unbelievably blinding light. The light was so powerful that Jian Chen could not help but close his eyes and use his hands to cover them. They throbbed with piercing pain. But the sun and the sky stopped moving. Instead, it continued to let out a blinding light as it rapidly enlarged, falling at a terrifying rate and giving off a tremendous and terrifying pressure. This seemed like the end of the world. The sun was falling and the entire sky was covered by it. It was a grand scene. Beneath it, the azulate swords shot up as long streaks of light, striking the sun with an unstoppable might. Boom! The sun and the swords collided in the sky, immediately erupting with a deafening boom. The entire sky appeared like a woven tapestry with violet and azure strings and the radiance of the sun, causing the entire world to appear multicolored. After the strike, the azulate swords shot back and returned to Jian Chen's side. The huge falling sun in the sky came to a stop as well, immediately stopping in the air. Its radiance dulled, as if it was a setting sun and no longer complete. Spirit of the tower, we would still end up finding you no matter where you hid, and just as we expected, you've become weak. Zi Ying's figure appeared, staring at the sun in the sky. He was speaking to it. Qing Suo appeared as well, standing beside Zi Ying. She stared at the sky with her beautiful eyes and said, "Spirit of the tower, so not only are you weak, but you're not even complete. How can you be our opponent in your current state? Why don't you yield to our master instead, and we'll spare your life." Chapter 1481, 9 Fragments of the Artifact Spirit. Jian Chen's gaze landed on the dim sun as well. He could tell that the sun was probably a transformed artifact spirit. The moment Jian Chen glanced over, the sun immediately began to change, morphing into a red-robed child. The child seemed very young, but his eyes seemed weather-hardened from countless years of life. A shallow slash between his eyes was extremely eye-catching. The child sternly stared at the azulate swords. His eyes were filled with sharp killing intent. He then glanced at Jian Chen. He suddenly broke into laughter and sneered, "This must be the new master of yin-yang swords. I never thought the famed yin-yang swords of the immortals world would take on such a puny person as their master. What a joke." The sword spirits were unaffected by the child's scornful comments. Zi Ying rebuked, "Spirit of the tower, we may not have been your opponent while injured and in your domain, but you have been sealed up by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Killing you is nothing difficult now. Yielding is the only way you can survive." "Humph, you're dreaming if you want me to yield to an ant. Even a Grand Prime cannot make me yield even if they stood before me, let alone him, a person who hasn't even reached godhood and who belongs to the immortals world," the spirit of the tower coldly replied. Killing intent flickered through Jian Chen's eyes. He rose up into the air with the Zi Ying sword and charged toward the child. He swung his sword at him and coldly said, "Then I can only kill you if you don't want to yield." The slash seemed to conjure a huge, violet sword chi that was 100 meters long. It whistled through the air with shocking might. "Just you? Even a mere ant dares to speak to me like this. Even if I'm extremely weak, I can still kill you. Go cultivate for a few 100,000 more years." The red-robed child was extremely confident, displaying deep scorn for Jian Chen. He gently swept a finger across the air and the power of the first floor immediately surged over from all directions, crushing inward with a devastating might. But the 4 swords that Jian Chen had seen earlier shook gently, immediately letting out a hazy glow. They suppressed the power of the Inata Tower. The child could only use a tiny sliver of it in the end. However, even the tiny sliver possessed the power of someone at receival. It shot toward Jian Chen as a thread. Jian Chen stabbed the Zi Ying sword at the thread of energy, and it loudly collapsed, disappearing into the air of the first floor. The power of the thread was slightly weaker than the receival expert from the world of Forsaken Saints that Jian Chen had killed, so not only had it failed to injure Jian Chen, but it even struggled to stagger him. Jian Chen's figure paused slightly before immediately disappearing, only leaving behind an afterimage. He charged toward the red-robed child at an even greater speed. The boy's face changed, and he immediately retreated in a hurry. Along the way, he constantly waved his arms, condensing threads of energy from the Inata Tower's power, which was being suppressed by the 4 swords. The threads all possessed the power of a single attack from a receival expert, and they all shot toward Jian Chen with a wave of the boy's arm. Jian Chen's gaze sharpened as he rapidly approached the boy. Jian Chen cleaved all the threads of energy that were shot his way, producing violent ripples of energy, which would disperse into the surroundings with deafening booms. The boy was unable to stop Jian Chen's advance at all. The child's face immediately became distorted when he saw how he could do nothing to Jian Chen. It became extremely vicious as he furiously roared. "That goddamn Nirvanic old bastard! He couldn't destroy the Inata Tower, so he split me into 9 fragments instead, forcing each fragment to protect only one layer of the tower. Not only am I unable to recover my strength, but I have to endure the suppressing sword chi he left in me. How could I have fallen to such a miserable state otherwise, where I can't even kill an ant?" The red-robed boy knew he could no longer escape as he watched Jian Chen rapidly approach him. Even in his own territory, he was unable to recover due to the seal within him. The longer the battle was drawn out, the more disadvantageous it was to him, so he immediately went crazy. He stopped and charged forward, charging toward Jian Chen with the last of his power. He furiously roared, "I have 9 bodies and each one is more powerful than the last. My body on the first floor is the weakest, and the one on the 9th floor is the strongest. You can kill me on the first floor, but I'd like to see how you will kill me on the 9th floor. As long as I live on that floor, you will never be able to obtain the tower." The boy charged toward Jian Chen without fearing death. He did not avoid the Ziying sword at all. He pointed his chest at it while it flickered with a violet light. Spurt! The Ziying sword passed through the child's chest, but at the same time, the boy landed a punch on Jian Chen. The fist collided violently with Jian Chen, erupting with a deep thud. Jian Chen's face changed, and he vomited blood. He was immediately blown back while the boy's body gradually dispersed. Jian Chen only managed to stabilize himself after traveling several kilometers. His face was pale. Even though the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had split the spirit of the tower into 9 fragments, which were all sealing him, even just the weakest possessed the strength of someone within the Origin Realm. It was extremely difficult for Jian Chen to endure a strike from an Origin Realm expert, so he was left heavily injured. As the child vanished, the space where he had been standing before immediately began to tremble, gradually transforming into a dark hole. Jian Chen knew that the hole was likely the entrance to the next floor. However, he did not rush forward. Instead, he sat down where he was. A strand of extremely dense radiant Saint Force origin energy swelled forth, covering his body in a gentle, white light. Meanwhile, his injuries began to heal at an unbelievable rate. In just a few seconds, Jian Chen recovered from a wound that others would take a few months, the very least, or a few years to recover from. He was as good as new now. Jian Chen stood up only after reaching his peak condition. He confidently walked into the dark hole that led to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor also possessed a huge world. It was desolate and showed no signs of life. The first thing that Jian Chen did was tear through the clouds after arriving on the 2nd floor. He stared at the sun. The sun was truly just a fragment. It was heavily damaged and less than 1/10 of its original size. Jian Chen stared at the sun for a while before confirming it was not the artifact spirit in the end. After confirming that, he looked at the clouds beneath and looked around, only leaving after confirming that there were no problems. Jian Chen aimlessly flew about the 2nd floor. He passed by barren mountains after barren mountains. The skeletons of a few beasts lay on them. They were all extremely large and seemed to possess strength far greater than the Origin Realm back when they were still alive. The skeletons should have been preserved for long periods of time. Maybe because the tower had been damaged, but they had all eroded away. With just a gentle touch, they would turn into a pile of dust. Chapter 1482, The Tower Spirit's Shock. The world of the 2nd floor was much more complete. Even though the ends of the floor also possessed the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords, which were hovering in dark space, the remaining world still possessed a few mountains and rivers. Jian Chen had even found a sea. Without exception, the mountains were barren and the rivers were dry. Even the sea had been reduced to a relatively small basin. Jian Chen had even come across cities. Each city was countless times larger than any capital city on the Tianyuan continent. The damaged city walls stood thousands of meters high, reaching toward the sky, while the city itself was filled with humanoid skeletons. Some of the skeletons even bore a shred of presence from their former lives. Jian Chen immediately leaped in fright when he sensed them, but no matter how powerful their former owners were, the skeletons had been eroded by time, along with everything they had once possessed. It was not that the items here could not withstand the erosion of time, but that the Anata Tower had been damaged. They suffered from its effects and all passed away during the Great Battle. When Jian Chen arrived in another giant city, the azulate swords immediately perked up. Zi Ying's voice rang out in his head. "Found him, master. The spirits hiding in the city ahead." Just as Zi Ying spoke, the ground suddenly began to shake. The damaged city walls immediately collapsed, kicking dust into the air. "Swords of Yin and Yang, you are far too wretched. I will suppress you." An angry roar reverberated from the city ahead. A red-robed boy furiously flew from the city. A vicious glow was present in his eyes. He seemed fierce. The boy had sensed that the sword spirits had found where he was. Even though he was very weak, Jian Chen would not be able to find him within the Anata Tower if he hid properly. However, he could not hide from the sword spirits. His position had been revealed by the sword spirits on both the first and second floor, so his hatred for the sword spirits was growing deeper. As the boy charged over, the power within the Anata Tower immediately surged. This time, Jian Chen could clearly sense the boy's strength. He was actually quite stronger than he was on the first floor. However, Jian Chen felt no fear. He slashed out and imbued the attack with his comprehension of the way of the sword. A sliver of power from the ways surged toward the boy's head. "Freeze, world!" the boy yelled out. As soon as he finished speaking, the time in the world where Jian Chen stood seemed to stop. Even the air seemed to stop moving as well. Everything had frozen at that moment. Jian Chen came to a halt. He had been frozen while swinging his sword, unable to move at all. The azulate swords were unable to move either. The resplendent glow they gave off completely froze in place as well. It was also freezing space, but the red-robed boy's abilities were incomparable to Saint Kings or Saint Emperors. Not only did the frozen space trap Jian Chen, but it even managed to trap the sword chi from the azulate swords. The four swords at the boundaries of the second layer gently trembled and the frozen space around Jian Chen returned to how it had been. As soon as he regained his mobility, he saw a streak of red light descend from the sky, forming a cage around him and the azulate swords. A mysterious power permeated the cage, limiting the strength that Jian Chen could display, immediately making him feel like even just 80% of his full strength was impossible to achieve. The chaotic force within him circulated abnormally slow as well. "Swords of Yin and Yang, I can't kill you, but I can suppress you," the red-robed boy roared out. Mysterious inscriptions hovered in front of his hands. He then sent them toward the Ziying sword and Qing Suo sword with lightning-like speed in an attempt to force the inscriptions into the swords. The two swords grew brighter and resisted with their full might, but to Jian Chen's surprise, he had lost control of the two swords. However, he used a finger to condense some sword chi and stabbed at the boy. "Piss off." The boy was busy with suppressing the azulate swords, so he did not want to spend too much time dealing with Jian Chen. Faced with Jian Chen's attack, he did not try to avoid it at all. He just raised his right fist and hurled it at Jian Chen. Jian Chen's sword chi was dispersed by the boy's punch. Even though the sword chi was dispersed, the fist did not slow down at all. It landed on Jian Chen's chest, and with a thud, Jian Chen was blown out of the boundary of the cage of light. The boy's entire right hand disappeared as well. The next moment, a new arm grew out of the boy's body. The boy clearly dimmed when the new arm appeared. Jian Chen was immediately free of the restrictions the moment he left the boundary of the red light. He condensed a strand of sword chi with his fingers and attacked the cage of red light from outside. It constantly shook under his attack. The red-robed child used all he had to suppress the azulate swords within the cage of the red light. He said with a vicious face, "Swords of yin and yang, once I suppress you, I'll throw you into the space annihilated by those 4 swords from the Nirvanic bastard. I'd like to see how you return. Without your help, I won't have to expend any effort to kill that ant. This is my territory after all. I reign supreme within my territory. Tower Spirit, you still can't kill Master with your current strength. This Anata Tower will be of great help to Master, and he's come with the intention of taking it. The only way for you to survive is to yield to Master," persuaded Ziying. She was using everything she had to resist the boy's suppression. "Ha ha ha, swords of yin and yang, are you mad? You actually want me to yield to an ant?" The boy laughed aloud. His voice was filled with scorn and sarcasm. "Tower Spirit, Qing Sua and I were born in the cosmos and transformed from a strand of yin and yang qi. You are also born from the cosmos and transformed from a way in the world. We don't wish to see you die here either. Master may still be weak, but he's not as simple as you have imagined him to be. Tower Spirit, you have to know that no matter how powerful you become, even if you reach the peak of Grand Prime or Immortal Exalt, you still won't be able to detect it. Only we spirits who are born from the universe can see it. Use that ability and take a look at our Master. I believe you will be able to catch a glimpse of the future," Ziying said sincerely. "Humph, an ant will be an ant. So what if he's extraordinary? He'll become a grand exalt of the Immortals world at most, and look at what happened to the greatest expert of the Immortals world, that Nirvanic bastard. Didn't he die in the end as well?" the boy sneered. He did not care about Jian Chen at all, but he was still tempted to glance at Jian Chen. This glance was not just a single observation. He was using his unique abilities as a spirit to catch a glimpse of someone's future. The boy's face drastically changed after that glance. His eyes widened drastically while shock and disbelief filled his face. "No, impossible, this is impossible, this is forbidden. The world cannot allow this. This cannot happen." Chapter 1483, Slaying the Artifact Spirit of the Second Floor. The boy loudly cried out while his face paled in a single moment. The gaze he sent toward Jian Chen underwent a drastic change as well. He no longer looked at Jian Chen like he was an ant but a terrifying existence. "Impossible, it's impossible for this to appear. It's impossible for this to happen. The world will not allow this at all. This is fake. This is fake. I refuse to believe it." The boy seemed to lose his mind as he violently trembled. The gaze he sent toward Jian Chen was filled with terror, shock, and disbelief. "Tower Spirit, the outcome you just saw is fated to happen. You know whether it's real or not. Are you willing to yield to our Master now?" Ziying asked nonchalantly. Even though she and Ziying had once stood on opposing sides to the Anata Tower, they still wished that Jian Chen could subdue the Tower Spirit even if there was only the shred of a possibility. That way, not only could Jian Chen avoid many difficult battles, but he would obtain the entire tower as well. After all, the difference of an Anata Tower with an artifact spirit and without an artifact spirit was extremely great. "Tower Spirit, considering that we're all spirits born from the world, we don't wish to see you die here, which is why we're persuading you to yield to our Master. You may be transformed from a strand of the universe's origins, but you are not eternal. Even the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt would need to take extreme measures to kill you when you were in your prime, but you've already been suppressed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt for many years now. Not to mention the fact that you've been split into 9 fragments, which has prevented you from recovering at all after all these years and causing you to weaken to such a state. You no longer possess the toughness you once had before. Killing you is not difficult, Ziying said in a deep voice. The red-robed boy did not waver at all. He looked at Jian Chen in terror sometimes, viciously at other times, and even madness. He roared out, "You're dreaming if you want me to yield. Since I can see the terrifying future of your master, I will destroy him right now and prevent it." The fear in the boy's eyes vanished and was replaced by a vicious madness. He stopped suppressing the sword spirits and charged at Jian Chen without the fear of death. Determination appeared in his eyes. He was willing to sacrifice everything. The boy was much stronger than when he had been on the first layer. Even though the seals of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords still existed, he could use slightly more power than on the first floor. As the boy charged over, the power of the tower surged once more, rapidly condensing into a miniature tower before the boy. The tower was only 3 inches tall, and at a closer glance, it was actually a miniature of the Inata Tower. As soon as the tower was condensed, it began to exude a mysterious and powerful force. It was filled with a brutal and destructive intent, causing Jian Chen's eyes to narrow. The azulate swords were still entangled by the boy's suppression. Without the swords, Jian Chen's strength had drastically fallen, so he did not choose to take the attack head-on. With a single movement, he left behind an afterimage, reappearing 100 meters away. The boy's miniature tower struck the space where Jian Chen had stood before. When the tower hit the space there, it immediately produced a groan as strands of a destructive power saturated the air there, causing the space there to violently tremble. If it were not for the fact that the space within the Inata Tower was extremely tough, the boy probably would have caused the space in a radius of over 1,000 meters to collapse. "Where do you think you're going? I'll kill you today and completely end you," the boy yelled. He continued toward Jian Chen, who was 100 meters away. His mad eyes were fixated on him. They were filled with crazy killing intent. Jian Chen was stunned. He stared at the boy and could clearly sense that the boy was different, as if the boy was a whole different person. It seemed like he had completely fallen out with the boy. The boy wanted to kill Jian Chen regardless of the price he had to pay. However, this thought disappeared with a flash in Jian Chen's head. He stared at the shrunken tower in the boy's hand. He could clearly sense that the power within the tower had weakened after the strike from before. Chaotic force surged within Jian Chen. The chaotic Naiden within his dantian spewed out large amounts of chaotic force. It moved through his body and filled every inch of it. He condensed a chaotic sword chi in his right as well. Sword origin. With a thought, strands of powerful sword chi began to condense from the surroundings. The sword chi possessed the power of ways, fusing with the chaotic sword chi in Jian Chen's hand. He stabbed toward the boy's tower with lightning-like speed. With a boom, Jian Chen's body violently shook before stumbling back. He only stabilized himself after moving several hundred meters away. The sword chi in his hand had dulled. Meanwhile, the boy had only paused in his advance. He continued charging after Jian Chen, still filled with a vicious madness. The miniature tower in his hand had become even more illusory. The boy had originally been able to use all the power of the tower as he wished as long as he was in it, but the Inata Tower had been sealed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Thus, the power he could use was unprecedentedly low. He could not even replenish it after he used it. This was why he was becoming weaker the longer he fought Jian Chen. Jian Chen was different. The consumption of his chaotic force was extremely gradual while the sword chi condensed from his comprehension of the way of the sword only took a slight toll on his soul. The tower spirit was unable to handle a battle that dragged on. After a single moment, the chaotic sword chi began to glowing once again in Jian Chen's hand. The way of the sword fused with it as he slashed at the boy again. Boom! Jian Chen staggered back again after the attack. His face was now pale, but the miniature tower in the boy's hand had completely disappeared. He was also pale, but the vicious madness in his eyes had not weakened at all. Instead, it had grown thicker. Jian Chen swung his hand and shot a strand of sword qi between the boy's eyes before the boy could stabilize himself. Spurt! The sword qi left behind a wound 3 inches wide on the boy's forehead. However, he did not die, his body only faded slightly. At the same time, the azulate swords finally broke free from their restraints. They flew over as long streams of light, passing through the boy's body and returning to Jian Chen's hands. The boy's illusory body finally disappeared after receiving the attacks of the swords. His gaze appeared vicious, mad, and regretful. Master, even though the tower spirit is weak, it's very difficult for you to kill him with just your strength. Only Qing Suo and I can deal fatal wounds to him, Zi Ying's voice rang through Jian Chen's head. Jian Chen gazed at the hole to the 3rd floor, which appeared with the boy's death. He did not show any happiness at all and frowned instead. The body of the artifact spirit has been split into 9 fragments by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. They guard the 9 floors of the tower. The one on the 1st floor is the weakest, and the one on the 9th floor is the strongest. We've only arrived on the 2nd floor and he's already so difficult to deal with. I wonder just how powerful the artifact spirit will be once I reach the 9th floor. He'll probably be very hard to deal with just my strength. Jian Chen revealed his worries. He needed to advance to the 9th floor to obtain the Inata Tower, or all of his progress was pointless. Originally, Jian Chen planned on looking for some things left behind by the Inata Grand Prime in the Inata Tower, but after going through the first 2 floors, he understood that everything that had been stored on the floors, no matter how valuable, had been destroyed when the tower became damaged. They had been reduced to dust. Probably only the items that the Inata Grand Prime had devoted special effort to store away would still be in perfect condition. Master, using the tower spirit's strength from the 1st and 2nd floors, the tower spirit on the 9th floor will indeed be much stronger than Master. Unless Master uses all that he has, it's impossible for you to be his opponent with your current strength, Zi Ying said rather sternly. It's just a pity that the tower spirit doesn't want to yield to Master, or it would have been much easier to obtain this tower, but don't despair, Master. Even if you can't attempt the 9th floor right now, even the 9th floor won't be able to stop you soon, said Qing Suo. Jian Chen fell silent. The tunnel to the world of Forsaken Saints on the Tianyuan continent was stabilizing and there was nothing he could do about it. Eventually the tunnel would be tough enough to withstand the passage of returnance experts. He wanted to try all the options available to increase his strength, and it was extremely likely that a great fortune was hidden within the Inata Tower, which was why he did not want to give up on it yet. At the same time, Jian Chen was not completely confident he could survive the next battle against the foreign world, so this would likely be the final adventure of his life. He wanted to try his best to gain control of the Inata Tower. He would not feel regretful even if there was no great fortune like he had imagined. Suddenly, Jian Chen seemed to think of something. His eyes gradually lit up as he said, maybe it's not completely impossible. The sword qi that the Nirvanic Immortal Exalts left around the Inata Tower still exists even after countless years. This sword qi has probably already gained spirituality now. Maybe I can ask them for help. The sword spirits were stunned. They had never thought that Jian Chen would actually try to seek help from the sword qi. Zi Ying shook his head. Master, that's impossible. The sword qi may now possess spirituality, but they also possess the will of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The will he left behind for the sword qi was to suppress and seal. It's basically impossible to get the sword qi to abandon the will of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt and get them to help you. Chapter 1484, intelligent sword chi, even if it might not work, I still have to try. Jian Chen made up his mind. He did not rush off to the 3rd floor and instead arrived near a boundary of the 2nd floor. A 30,000-meter-long sword chi hung in the shattered space and would remain there for all of eternity. It was the sword of mortality, which possessed one of the ways comprehended by the Nirvanic immortal exalt. The sword possessed the power to destroy the foundations of immortals and prevent them from becoming an immortal ever again. Back then, your master was unable to destroy the Inata Tower, so he left you, the sword of mortality, here to suppress the tower. He also split the artifact spirit into 9 fragments and then sealed them on each floor of the tower. The artifact spirit has become extremely weak after so many years of suppression. Junior managed to slay the artifact spirit on the 1st and 2nd floors, but the artifact spirits will only get stronger the higher I go. With my current strength, it will be very difficult for me to reach the 9th floor, and without killing the artifact spirit on the 9th floor, the spirit will never really die off. I hope you can assist me. Help this junior battle against the artifact spirit of the Inata Tower and completely eliminate him, thus completing one of your master's wishes. At the same time, the Inata Tower of the Saints' world will become an item of our immortals' world. Jian Chen stared at the huge sword in the air and sincerely pleaded with it. The sword hung quietly in the dark space. It did not give off any movements or sound. Although it was only a strand of sword chi, it had gained a certain level of spirituality after so many years. Jian Chen waited for quite a long time. After not receiving a response from the sword of mortality, he used his comprehension of the way of the sword in an attempt to resonate with the sword chi. He did not attempt to comprehend the will of a sword god that existed within the sword chi. All he wanted to do was gain its recognition and treat him as one of its own. This was because the Nirvanic immortal exalt also comprehended the way of the sword. Jian Chen walked the same path of cultivation as the Nirvanic immortal exalt. There were probably many sword immortals who comprehended the way of the sword in the immortals' world, so the cultivation path he took probably did not matter much at all, but it filled Jian Chen with some hope. The sword of mortality still did not respond. It remained within the darkness, like how it had been before. Jian Chen attempted many other methods, but they all resulted in failure. In the end, he stayed there for 3 days and only left after seeing that nothing he did had any effect. However, Jian Chen did not give up. The sword chi in the tower had developed intelligence, so he firmly believed that the sword chi could understand what he was saying. Jian Chen soon arrived before a second illusionary sword on the 2nd floor. It was the sword of reincarnation, which also possessed one of the ways comprehended by the Nirvanic sword immortal. It could send immortals into an endless cycle of rebirth, which they could never break free from. Jian Chen repeated what he had said to the first sword and then tried many other methods as well, but the results were the same. He did not receive a response at all. 3 days later, Jian Chen left and arrived before the sword of slaughter. The outcome was the same as the 2 swords from before. Jian Chen also remained there for 3 days before advancing to the 4th sword of the Nirvanic immortal exalt, the sword of severance. After another 3 days, Jian Chen left, dejected. He returned to the 1st floor of the tower with some regret and advanced toward the 4 boundaries in a similar fashion. 12 days later, Jian Chen had visited all the swords on the 1st floor, but the outcome was still disappointing. Although the 4 strands of sword chi possessed intelligence, they paid no attention to Jian Chen at all. They did not respond to him. Was I wrong? These strands of sword chi may possess spirituality, but they don't seem to be as intelligent as I thought they'd be. They can't understand my intentions, or maybe they do understand my intentions, but they can only remain in place, suppressing the Inata Tower because of the Nirvanic sword exalt's will and can't assist me in fighting the artifact spirit. Jian Chen murmured as despair flooded his face. He could not help but begin to suspect he was hoping for too much. After all, they were only strands of sword chi left behind by the Nirvanic immortal exalt. There's another 108 sword slashes outside the tower. Even though each slash is only a few inches long, I can tell that the sword chi within each slash is even more powerful than the 30,000-meter-long strands of sword chi in the Inata Tower. They might possess greater spirituality. It doesn't matter if I end up failing, but I need to give it a try, Jian Chen thought. Determination flowed through his eyes. He immediately dismissed his thought and exited the Inata Tower. 108 sword slashes were deeply embedded in the outside walls of the Inata Tower. Each slash flickered with light and radiated with surging sword chi. 36 illusory swords were projected from 36 sword slashes. They slowly revolved around the tower. Jian Chen stared at the sword slashes as he stood outside. The glow from the slashes seemed to be playing tricks, as if a figure sat within the light, as if the slashes bore life. I can clearly sense that the sword slashes are all much more powerful than the 4 swords I saw within the tower. At the same time, the spirituality of the sword slashes are far greater than the 4 illusory swords in the tower, Jian Chen mumbled as he stared at the 36 swords that revolved around the tower. He could tell that the 36 swords were composed of the sword of mortality, the sword of reincarnation, the sword of slaughter and the sword of severance. There were 9 of each. Jian Chen slowly shifted his gaze up and discovered that the 108 slashes became brighter the further up he looked. At the same time, they decreased in number as well. When he saw the 8 slashes on the 7th floor, the light they let out was extremely blinding. They were radiating with an invisible sword chi. It shook his mind and caused it to leap in fright. There were also 8 slashes on the 8th floor, but the 8 slashes were far more powerful than the ones on the 7th floor. Each slash seemed to contain a miniature sun. Their sword intent were just shocking. Jian Chen dared not to stare at them for too long. However, when Jian Chen glanced at the 9th floor, he suddenly became stunned. He only saw 4 sword slashes on the 9th floor, but the slashes were not as radiant nor powerful as he had imagined. Instead, they were dull and did not give off any sense of spirituality at all. Jian Chen only saw 4 empty sword slashes. Have the 4 strands of sword chi vanished? Jian Chen was taken aback. He knew that there had definitely been strands of shocking sword chi within the slashes. The remnant of the marks on the tower proved his point. However, for some reason, the 4 strands of sword chi that were supposed to be the most powerful had suddenly disappeared. Jian Chen did not think about it too much about. He slowly rose up and utilized his comprehension of sword origin, radiating with his own will in an attempt to communicate with the sword slashes and resonate with them. Jian Chen would have never tried this if the sword slashes did not possess spirituality, but they did. Jian Chen believed the sword slashes could understand him and his intentions. The only difference was whether they wanted to assist him or not. Jian Chen slowly rose up, passing by the 1st and 2nd floor before continuing to the 3rd and 4th floor. However, the sword slashes did not respond without any exceptions. Jian Chen sighed inside. He had guessed that it would turn out like this, but he did not give up. He gritted his teeth and slowly continued up. Very soon, he reached the 7th and 8th floors. The sword slashes there did not respond either. The slashes glowed with a dazzling light and were teeming with spirituality, but they completely ignored him. Jian Chen became even more disappointed. He was unwilling to go to the 9th floor because only empty slashes remained. To him, it would be useless even if he went to that level. However, what Jian Chen failed to notice was that weak strands of his presence were drifting away, headed toward the 4 empty slashes on the 9th floor before being absorbed by them. Jian Chen slowly descended. Just when he had arrived near the 7th floor, the empty slashes on the 9th floor actually radiated with strand of sword chi. The sword chi was not very powerful, nowhere near as great as the slashes on the 8th floor, but they caused Jian Chen to come to a halt. He raised his head and stared at the empty sword slashes in anticipation. The 4 slashes grew brighter and brighter, becoming very dazzling. They glowed like miniature suns, dyeing the entire world a snow-white hue. Although most of the sword chi within the slashes and their spirituality had vanished for some reason, there was still slivers of weak sword chi. The sword chi was insignificant compared to the 8th floor, 7th floor, and the floors beneath. They did not even seem to be able to take part in the suppression of the tower. However, at that moment, the remnant sword chi within the empty slashes rapidly condensed together, creating a blinding light. The light lasted for half a minute. When the white light from the slashes disappeared, the 4 slashes on the 9th floor completely dulled, having been reduced to 4 deep marks. Before them were 4 small swords that glowed with a faint white light. The swords were only the size of a hand, exquisitely crafted, and crystal clear. The 4 sword chi gradually descended before arriving in front of Jian Chen. Jian Chen stared at the 4 small swords and gradually became excited. The swords were small, but Jian Chen could sense a power that caused him to shiver. Any single one of them could erupt with power far greater than his full strength. Chapter 1485, Reciprocity Sword Chi. Shaoling's strength is at returnance, so I've personally witnessed the power at returnance. However, the vague presence from these 4 small swords is far more powerful than Shaoling. Have the power of these swords reached reciprocity? Jian Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he silently sensed the terrifying sword chi within the 4 swords. In the end, his heart even began to beat harder. Fantastic! With these 4 strands of sword chi, I have a high chance of killing the tower spirit, Jian Chen murmured excitedly. He then thought about the threat of the foreign world and began to hesitate. These 4 sword chi exhibit the power at reciprocity. If I use these 4 strands of sword chi to deal with the experts from the world of Forsaken Saints, I'll be able to kill for returnance experts at the very least, possibly more, even if they can't harm the Spirit King. Jian Chen hesitated. He had come to the Anata Tower primarily to increase his own strength to deal with the foreign world. However, now that he had obtained these 4 strands of sword chi, he was stuck in a dilemma. He was not sure if he should use the sword chi to deal with the tower spirit and obtain the Anata Tower or just it to deal with the foreign experts. However, Jian Chen made up his mind. He said, I originally only asked these strands of sword chi to kill the tower spirit, so if I use these 4 strands of sword chi to deal with the experts of the world of Forsaken Saints, I would be going back on my word. These 4 strands of sword chi might even disperse, no longer assisting me. Jian Chen no longer wavered. His eyes became determined as he slowly raised his hand, planning on storing the sword chi in his space ring. However, to his surprise, the sword chi immediately disappeared into his hand the moment he touched them. The image of 4 small swords appeared on his right arm. Jian Chen silently sensed his arm. He could clearly feel the existence of the 4 small swords, but the 4 swords no longer seemed tangible to him. Instead, they were 4 illusory strands of sword chi and possessed a faint connection to his conscience. Jian Chen discovered that he could actually use the 4 strands of sword chi as he wished through this connection. The sword chi have already gained spirituality and intelligence. They possess their own lives and are no longer just strands of sword chi. Jian Chen sighed in surprise. He was not sure whether it was because of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt Supreme Strength or him comprehending Sword God that allowed his sword chi to become spirits after many years. Jian Chen left the area with the 4 sword chi and entered the Anata Tower again. Very soon, he passed through the 2nd floor and arrived on the 3rd. When he had reached the 3rd floor, before he could gain his bearings, a terrifying killing intent appeared behind him, forcing his muscles to tense up. At the same time, he emitted a bright glow, created from his comprehension of the way of the sword, which wrapped around him. Jian Chen then took a step to the side on instinct. He vanished from where he was with that single step, reappearing 100 meters away as if he had just teleported. Jian Chen had completed all those actions smoothly and in a single moment. His reaction speed was superhuman. Right after Jian Chen had dodged, an ear-piercing whistle appeared where he had been standing. A tiny tower had passed by as a blur, radiating with an overwhelming presence of destruction. The space the tower touched twisted slightly. To no surprise, the red-robed boy hovered behind where Jian Chen had appeared before. The gaze he sent toward Jian Chen was full of anger and seemed to be full of fear at times, but that fear would quickly be replaced by wild killing intent. Killing intent flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. With a thought, the Ziying sword shot toward the red-robed boy as a streak of violet light. The Ziying sword crossed several hundred meters and arrived before the boy in a single moment. However, the boy did not pay any attention to the sword this time. He only stared at Jian Chen. Suddenly, he vanished, causing the Ziying sword to miss. Jian Chen became alert the same moment the boy vanished. He extended his finger backward all of a sudden and the Qing Suo sword immediately flew from his back, in the direction of where Jian Chen had pointed. With a boom, the boy had appeared behind Jian Chen and used the miniature tower in his hand to strike the Qing Suo sword. The powerful ripple of energy emitted from the collision caused Jian Chen to stagger back. His clone on the third floor is slightly stronger than the second floor, but it's still limited. Killing him here will not be difficult, Jian Chen thought. From the clash before, he had determined the strength of the boy. Freeze, world! Suddenly, the boy yelled and the power of the Inata tower on the third floor immediately began to surge. It seemed like a law had been created, attempting to shackle time itself. Jian Chen's face changed slightly. He had personally experienced this technique before. It was not as simple as freezing space. Not only could it trap him, but even the azulate swords were not able to avoid it. He would only remain frozen for a short instance, but that was more than enough time to completely change the situation. Sky-severing strike. Before the boy could complete his technique, Jian Chen formed a seal with his hand and used a sword technique as quickly as he could. The sword spirits had passed this sword technique onto him. It belonged to the immortals world, and even though it was only a basic skill, its power far exceeded any Saint-tier battle skill. Jian Chen could erupt with power far greater than his peak when he used it. The Ziying sword immediately lit up as soon as Jian Chen stopped speaking and became 100 meters long in a single moment. It radiated with a mysterious power. The region enveloped by the violet light had become a whole different domain. To no surprise, the boy stood in the domain as well. Jian Chen was completely unaffected in the domain, but to the boy's surprise, he was completely immobilized. Sword domain. God damn it, you want to trap me with a mere sword domain. If I wasn't so weak, just a breath from me is enough to shatter this sword domain. The boy was furious. He was ashamed to be trapped in such a weak domain. As soon as the sword domain formed, the technique used by the boy descended as well, clashing with the sword domain. It immediately caused the area around them to distort, showing signs of shattering. Jian Chen narrowed his eyes. Without any hesitation, he suddenly extended his finger, taking advantage of the moment the boy was trapped. The 100-meter-long sword immediately fell toward the boy. Boom! The strike was extraordinarily powerful. After passing through the red-robed boy, the Ziying sword did not slow down at all. It continued toward the ground and immediately erupts with a great boom. The entire ground rumbled and dust was kicked into the air, obscuring the sun. The boy cried out painfully and immediately began to fade. Describing the strike as devastating was no exaggeration. It had even been imbued with Jian Chen's comprehension of the way of the sword. It possessed a sliver of power from laws, the power of ways. Even though the power was extremely puny right now, its strength was evident. The boy had almost dispersed after withstanding such a strike. I will never let things be easy for you even if I have to destroy this body. The boy roared. He became determined as a flame suddenly rose from his illusory body. Within the flames, the boy's body gradually faded while his presence skyrocketed, becoming more and more powerful. Jian Chen became stern. He knew that the boy was using a secret technique to sacrifice himself to obtain greater power. Just when Jian Chen moved to stop him, the boy's figure completely dissolved in the flames. Only a tiny tower hovered where the boy had been, radiating with terrifying pulses of energy. Swish! The tower turned into an afterimage as it shot toward Jian Chen with an ear-piercing whistle. A destructive presence permeated its surroundings, causing even Jian Chen's expression to change. He knew that this destructive presence was a type of law, the power of a way. Even though the power the child had condensed was not extremely intense, it was still a large threat to Jian Chen. At the same time, the boy had burned his body in exchange for the strike. It was unimaginably powerful. Jian Chen became extremely stern. The tower had already locked onto him, so it was impossible for him to dodge it. In that dangerous moment, Jian Chen used his finger as a sword and pointed at the Qing Suo sword. He cried out, "Spiral Sword Qi." The Qing Suo sword immediately began to shine, transforming into a streak of azure light and arriving before Jian Chen's chest. The entire sword began to spin like a wheel with the hilt as the center. It spun so fast that it turned into a flurry in just a short moment. It released azure waves, which began to cause the space in front of it to oscillate, as if it had become thick. At the same time, the Ziying sword flew toward the tiny tower as a violet streak of light, colliding with it violently and emitting a great boom. The Ziying sword was knocked far away, but the tower did not waver at all. It remained locked onto Jian Chen's presence and surged toward him with an unstoppable motion. When it entered the rings of azure waves from the Qing Suo sword, it immediately began to slow down. The power in the tower was actually dissipating at an unbelievable speed. Not only did the waves created by the azure sword slow down the tower, but they rapidly wore the tower down. However, the tower still moved at an unbelievable speed even though it had slowed down, instantly striking the spinning sword. The Qing Suo sword was also knocked far away and stopped spinning. The waves immediately vanished. The tower had encountered two obstacles by now and was only half as powerful as it had been initially. Afterward, with its tip at the front, it passed through Jian Chen's chest. Jian Chen violently trembled as he staggered back. His face instantly paled, and a bowl-sized cavity had appeared in his chest. Chapter 1486. Through to the 8th floor. Jian Chen spat blood from his mouth as his body continued to tremble. The flesh near his wound was dissolving at a visible rate, turning into pools of blood. The tiny tower had deposited a strand of power that came from a law in his wound when it pierced through his body. The power was filled with destruction, constantly wreaking havoc on Jian Chen's body. If it were not for the fact that Jian Chen's chaotic body was extraordinarily tough and had stunted the rate of destruction, probably half of his body would have been eaten away by now. The last portion of power within the tiny tower had dispersed after piercing Jian Chen. The tower itself then began to disperse, immediately releasing the path to the 4th floor. However, Jian Chen was currently enduring intense pain. The sliver of destruction deposited into his body by the last attack was constantly gnawing away at his body, causing the flesh near his wound to gradually vanish, as if millions of ants were eating away at it. Even though his chaotic force was extraordinary, it was not enough to stop the spreading destruction. After all, he did not possess true chaotic force. Just the chaotic force of the 5th layer was not enough to resist the power of laws. Suddenly, Jian Chen roared out while he endured the pain. The roar shook the surroundings and endless white light immediately condensed. He was currently condensing sword qi near his chest, using the way of the sword to resist the power of a law in his wound. The power of a law in his wound immediately came to a standstill with the addition of the power from the way of the sword. These two laws immediately became locked in an intense battle, and in the end, the destructive presence from the artifact spirit ran out of steam and was destroyed by Jian Chen's way of the sword. Jian Chen finally let out a breath of relief after purging the power of a law from his body. The bull-sized hole in his chest had doubled in size, taking up most of his chest. The organs and flesh in the hole had disappeared. Even though he was very heavily injured, Jian Chen still stood there firmly like a mountain. He was still brimming with life after such injuries because of the power of chaotic force. Only his face was pale. It's been quite some time since I've suffered such a severe wound. The power of law sure is terrifying. I need to act more careful during future battles against the artifact spirit, Jian Chen murmured to himself before immediately sitting down. He used the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force to heal his wounds. Jian Chen made a full recovery in less than a single minute. The missing flesh in his chest had completely regrown, and he had returned to his peak condition. After changing into a set of fresh clothes, Jian Chen stepped into the fourth floor with the two swords on his back. The fourth floor was an endless expanse of mountains and rivers. Jian Chen discovered many withered heavenly resources and the remnants of extremely valuable medicines. Basically the entire place was covered with them. It was basically a medicinal garden. But, to his disappointment, the medicines had all been destroyed. Even though the huge expanse had once been covered with invaluable medicinal herbs, none of them remained. Jian Chen also experienced an intense battle against the artifact spirit on the fourth floor. The artifact spirit here was slightly stronger than the previous floor as well. Jian Chen managed to emerge victorious in the end, but he also suffered from even heavier injuries. Jian Chen recovered from his wounds and soon advanced to the fifth floor. Clearly, the Inata Grand Prime raised many valuable and rare beasts on the fifth floor. Huge skeletons loomed everywhere, and there were quite a few that were over 10,000 meters long. Even though they had been dead for quite some time, Jian Chen could still sense a tremendous pressure emanating from the skeletons. The pressure was still suffocating even after all this time. He found it difficult to imagine just how powerful these beasts once were. At the same time, the skeletons had not been eroded away. They remained as tough as stone, but all of them were destroyed during the battle that occurred against the artifact spirit. When Jian Chen finally slew the artifact spirit, he was missing an arm and a portion of his body was destroyed. He emerged victorious only after paying a heavy price. The artifact spirit on the fifth floor possessed a strength no less than late returnants. Coupled with the power of the destructive laws he could control, his battle prowess approached reciprocity. Jian Chen courageously continuing on, making his way through the sixth and seventh floors. The artifact spirits on these two floors possessed strength on par with reciprocity. If it were not for the suppression of the four swords within the tower, these two fragments probably could have erupted with strength at godhood, even after having not recovered any strength for years. Jian Chen was basically left with half a leg when he survived the sixth floor. He was extremely heavily injured and only managed to kill the artifact spirit after several hours of battle. Jian Chen had used everything he had when he attempted the seventh floor. Not only did he equip the primordial god silk, he even used a strand of the sword chi from the sword of mortality on his arm. Only then did he finally slay the artifact spirit. If he had not used that sword chi, he probably would have been done in. But, to his joy, the 4 strands of sword chi could be used more than once. However, he estimated that each strand of sword chi could only display the might of someone at reciprocity 3 times, and after those 3 times were up, their power would weaken and they would only be able to erupt with the power of someone at returnance. The sword chi would weaken with further uses before dispersing completely. Although the primordial god silk was not strong enough to take on origin realm attacks for Jian Chen, its toughness was still unprecedented. With the protection of the god silk, Jian Chen was able to endure having his body pierced. However, he still had to endure the intense force, which he found rather difficult even though his chaotic body was at the 5th layer. When he moved on to the 8th floor, he took off the primordial god silk without any hesitation. Although it would protect him and prevent his body from being pierced, the strength of the artifact spirit on the 8th floor was probably enough to shake his body to pieces while wearing the silk mail. The artifact spirit on the 8th floor was even more vicious and insane with hidden fear for Jian Chen. The fear was so deep that it had reached his spirit. This was already the 8th floor. Along the way, Jian Chen had slain 7 other fragments of the artifact spirit. If the artifact spirit on this floor was killed, there was only a single fragment left on the 9th floor. Once the fragment on the 9th floor was destroyed, the artifact spirit would truly disappear. He was unwilling to take the risk of leaving it all up to his fragment on the 9th floor even though he was more powerful there. At this moment, the artifact spirit felt an unprecedented threat. The danger of dying was so powerful that it was countless times greater than what the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had made him feel. When he faced the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt in the past, he was in his peak condition and being described as immortal was no exaggeration at all, but he was not the Immortal Exalt's opponent. Coupled with the Inata Grand Prime, the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt was unable to kill him, only managing to suppress and seal him away. However, after so much time, not only had he failed to recover at all, but he was still growing weaker and weaker due to the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's suppression and seals. He was coming close to running out of power, so if he was slain now, it would mean true death. After all, he was unable to achieve what the Azulate Sword spirits possessed, which was true immortality. It is already a great honor for you to be able to arrive on the 8th floor. This is where you will be buried today. You will never get the chance to reach the 9th floor. You will die here today, and I will be the one responsible for your death, the red-robed boy yelled at Jian Chen. He hovered several hundred meters away from Jian Chen. Tower Spirit, are you still too foolish to recognize the error of your ways? You will only die if you do not yield. Ziying appeared and tried to persuade the red-robed boy one last time. However, the response he received was the soaring killing intent from the red-robed boy as well as a strike formed from destructive Allah aimed at Jian Chen. With his arms stretched out, he gathered the power of the tower with great difficulty to use a secret technique. This time, the boy used all he had right from the start and did not hold back at all. He wanted to kill Jian Chen right here, right now. Jian Chen was stern. The boy on the 8th floor was equivalent to experts at mid or late reciprocity. Coupled with the power of the laws he could control, rarely anyone could be his match while at a similar cultivation level. It was impossible for Jian Chen to emerge victorious even if he used the Azulate swords. He would not even be able to counterattack. Jian Chen's right hand immediately began to flicker with light after he waved it. The sword of reincarnation hidden on his arm suddenly flew out, transforming into a streak of white light and shooting toward the boy at a speed that seemed to be able to pierce the fabric of space. Soon afterward, Jian Chen swung his arm 2 more times, sending out sword chi from the sword of slaughter and the sword of severance. He used 3 strands of sword chi to deal with the red-robed boy on the 8th floor. Each strand of sword chi moved at an indescribable speed. As if they were tearing through the limitations of distance, they arrived before the boy in a single moment. The boy's expression drastically changed. His fragment on the 7th floor had experienced the sword chi personally. Although its power was nowhere near the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's strength, it was enough to deal fatal damage to him. At the same time, the sword chi just happened to be able to move at an indescribably fast speed, so fast that the boy could not dodge them. All he could do was watch as they approached him. The first strand of sword chi collided with the power of destruction that the boy had sent out. Only a third of the initial sword chi struck the boy, causing him to cry out miserably while his face distorted in agony. Closely after the first, the second sword chi passed through the boy's body, causing him to become partially transparent. The secret technique he was about to use was disrupted as well. When the third sword chi struck him, his figure immediately dispersed, reduced to a cloud of thin mist. Chapter 1487, The Ninth Floor. Although the 3 strands of sword chi were only equivalent to attacks at reciprocity, the power of the way of the sword originated from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Although the power had dropped below the level of Sword God due to how much time had passed and was no longer as great as it had been before, they strands of sword chi were still more powerful than sword origin, so each strand of sword chi possessed the power to kill ordinary reciprocity experts. Even the artifact spirit on the 8th floor was unable to endure the attack from 3 strands of sword chi, so he began to collapse. However, the red-robed boy did not die. The residual mist in the air began to surge and condense into the boy's figure once again. His figure was so faint that he was almost invisible. Even burning his body would not work this time. I never thought you'd have 4 strands of that Nirvanic bastard sword chi, not just 1. However, the 4 strands of sword chi just happened to match up to the 4 swords of that old bastard. Now that you've used all of them, I'd like to see how you will deal with me on the 9th floor. The 9th floor will be where you truly fall. I will be waiting for you there, the boy sneered. Jian Chen said nothing. With a way of the Ziying sword, he immediately shot out a strand of sword chi and completely dispersed the red-robed boy's figure. Jian Chen did not hurry to the 9th floor. Instead, he sat down on the 8th floor and recovered to his peak. After all, the most powerful fragment of the artifact spirit was on the 9th floor. It was extremely likely that that fragment had reached godhood. Even though the 4 strands of sword chi still possessed 2 uses at reciprocity, Jian Chen was not completely confident they could kill the artifact spirit. It was extremely likely to be a vicious battle. If the tower spirit on the 9th floor really does possess strength at godhood, I'll probably be slain the first moment we start fighting, even with the azulate swords. With my current strength, I cannot even put up a struggle against a godhood expert. However, the artifact spirit isn't without weaknesses either. His greatest flaw is that he is unable to replenish the energy he consumes, so his power will only decrease during battle. At the same time, whenever he's injured, his strength will fall. Therefore, I'll use the 4 strands of sword chi from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt to heavily injure him the moment I step onto the 9th floor, causing his strength will fall. Once he becomes injured enough, his strength will fall below godhood. Jian Chen sat on the ground with his eyes closed as he pondered his options. He simulated his next battle against the artifact spirit of the 9th floor time and time again. Jian Chen visualized and then analyzed the battle from all aspects. He even added in all the techniques that he knew the artifact spirit could use. The outcome he reached against the final artifact spirit was not necessarily defeat. It would all depend on how the 4 sword chi were used. It's a pity that I've used all these sword chi once already and that they can only be used 2 more times. If they all could be used 3 times, my chances of victory could be as high as 80%. Jian Chen sighed inside. He felt very helpless. The artifact spirit on the 8th floor was so powerful that it was almost impossible for him to deal with. If he had not used the sword chi from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, he would not have been able to reach the 9th floor at all. He would have died on the 8th. But I still have a final trump card. It's just that the price of this technique is just far too precious, even I cannot endure it. However, it's the only thing I can do if I am at my wit's end. A gleam of light flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. The fusion of the 2 swords was his final card to protect himself as well as the technique he least wanted to use. This time, Jian Chen stayed on the 8th floor for half a month. Not only did he make sure he was in top shape, but he even came up with many methods to deal with the final artifact spirit. He made all the preparations he could. Jian Chen stood up and finally stepped onto the 9th floor. Before Jian Chen could even make out his surroundings, he immediately moved in a flash, leaving the entry point in a single moment to prevent the possibility of an ambush from the artifact spirit. Everything was tranquil. The dreary world of the 9th floor was terrifyingly silent. There were no signs of life at all. Jian Chen cautiously hovered in the sky as he vigilantly looked around. He felt rather surprised inside. The artifact spirit was not waiting at the entry to ambush him as he had expected. Is the artifact spirit so confident that he can deal with me that he doesn't need to stoop so low and ambush me? Jian Chen thought and immediately became rather stern. At this moment, a smear of golden light appeared near the horizon in the distance. It illuminated a portion of the sky, forming quite a wondrous scene in this dreary world. Jian Chen stared at the golden light and hesitated before flying over. The Ziying sword and Qing Suo sword hovered above Jian Chen's head. Both of them flickered with light, ready to dish out an attack at a moment's notice. When Jian Chen arrived at the source of the golden light, he discovered an extremely vast palace. The palace was letting out a blinding light and gave off a terrifying pressure. It was slightly illusory, making whatever was behind it slightly visible. This palace was only a projection and not the real thing. Jian Chen stared at the grand palace. Even though it was just a projection, it felt like it was dominating Jian Chen, as if all the laws of the world were beneath it. The heavenly palace of Bisheng. Jian Chen's eyes landed on the huge plate above the main entrance of the palace. There were 4 words on the plate, and they seemed to possess the variations of the laws of the world. The mysteries of the world were infused into the words. He clearly did not recognize them, but in the moment his eyes landed on the plate, the name somehow appeared in his head. I'll let you die before Master's world. That way, you can die without regret. Ha ha ha, wild laughter rang out and the red-robed boy charged out of the palace, heading toward Jian Chen as a blur. The pressure he gave off was so powerful that Jian Chen felt like he was shouldering a mountain. Jian Chen's movements had become rather slow while the presence of death spread through his head. He was greatly shocked. Currently, the strength of the boy made Jian Chen feel like he was facing an apocalypse. Jian Chen's eyes lit up, and with a wave of his hand, he used the 4 strands of sword qi from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. However, he seemed to see an odd smile that was barely visible on the boy's face at this moment. Jian Chen's eyes suddenly narrowed due to the smile. At this crucial moment, Jian Chen seemed to sense something. His hand continued along the same trajectory as before, but he shot out 4 small swords transformed from regular sword qi instead of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt sword qi. He imbued the sword qi with the presence of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's way of the sword so that they seemed just like the sword qi that the Immortal Exalt had left behind. As soon as Jian Chen sent out the 4 strands of sword qi, he swung his hand again and shot out 4 more similar strands of sword qi. He sent a total of 8 strands of sword qi contaminated with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's presence toward the boy at the same time. However, he did not stop there. After shooting out the 8 strands of sword qi, Jian Chen then began to use his own sword technique. The Ziying sword immediately became 100 meters long and the sword domain emerged, transforming the region enveloped to a whole different domain. It trapped the red-robed boy. The boy came to a halt. He was frozen, having been immobilized by the power of the sword domain. The 8 strands of sword qi with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's presence arrived with unbelievable speed and passed through the boy almost simultaneously. Soon afterward, the 100-meter-long Ziying sword also cleaved down on the boy, splitting him into 2. The boy rapidly disappeared, but he did not show any signs of pain or regret at all. Instead, he just smiled, oddly. Jian Chen stared at the disappearing boy in shock. His face immediately became extremely ugly as he exclaimed with a sunken face, "That's fake. It's not the real thing." Ha ha ha, that's right. That wasn't my true body just then, but a clone I condensed from energy. It's just a pity that you realized too late. A familiar voice rang out from nearby as soon as Jian Chen finished speaking. Another red-robed boy suddenly appeared, walking over from the side of the palace. He had hid himself there, using the pressure of the palace to conceal his own presence and trick the sword spirits. Just as I had expected. You actually still have the sword chi from that old Nirvanic bastard. If it wasn't for the fact that I was cautious and condensed a clone to test you, I would have been heavily injured already. However, now that you've used up all your sword chi, I'd like to see what you'll use to take me on. Killing you will only take a single move. So what about how forbidden you'll become in the future? You'll still die in my hands, the boy sneered. He suddenly pushed his right hand toward Jian Chen and an ancient tower immediately condensed over Jian Chen. The tower was several dozen meters tall and appeared exactly the same as the Inata Tower. It radiated with a presence that made Jian Chen lose his courage to battle. It loudly fell toward Jian Chen. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying pressure appeared from the tower, completely immobilizing Jian Chen. His feet were pushed into the ground by the pressure while all his bones creaked, as if they were about to break from the load. The tower above was filled with the destructive power of a law. The power had far exceeded anything Jian Chen had seen on the floors below. Jian Chen became extremely stern. His presence exploded, and with a flash of light through his eyes, the Ziying sword immediately shot toward the tower in the sky. Jian Chen formed a seal with his right hand and the Qing Suo sword began to use its spiral sword qi, producing rings of azure waves in an attempt to weaken the tower's power. Chapter 1488, Scheme Boom. The Ziying sword collided with the tower and a rumble could be, but it struggled to stop the tower. The Ziying sword was knocked to the ground, creating a huge hole. It was deeply buried in the ground. The tower did not slow down at all. It continued to fall toward Jian Chen with the destructive power of a law. Only when it came in contact with the sword qi from the Qing Suo sword did it slow down slightly. The waves gently wrapped around the tower, disappearing into the surroundings with slivers of the tower's power. The tower was rapidly weakening within the waves. But this process lasted less than a second before the tower passed through the waves. It landed on the Qing Suo sword. The Qing Suo sword thrummed and was sent into the ground just like the Ziying sword. The spiral sword qi used to weaken the tower immediately collapsed. By now, the tower was only a few meters above Jian Chen. Jian Chen seemed to lose his mind. Having lost the azulate swords, all he could rely on was his own power to stop the tower. He furiously roared out and coated himself with light. He imbued his fists with both chaotic force and the power of the way of the sword before hurling them at the tower. Bang! With a heavy sound, Jian Chen struck the tower as hard as he could with his fists. His body immediately jerked as blood spurted from his mouth. His hands, which had come in contact with the tower, were reduced to a bloody mess. The sound of bones breaking was barely audible. Jian Chen's hands fell powerlessly to his sides. All his bones in them had been shattered, no longer able to support raising them. On the other hand, the tower was only 3 inches away from his head now. However, after the several obstacles, there was not much power left in the tower either. Jian Chen lay down on the floor and used his entire body to withstand the final strike from the tower. He did it to avoid injuries to his head, allowing his soul to emerge unscathed. Boom! The tower viciously struck the ground. A terrifying force caused the entire floor to shake and rumble. Jian Chen's entire body was a bloody mess, having been distorted by the previous attack. He lay on the ground powerlessly, and within him, the destructive power of a law had infiltrated his body and was constantly wreaking havoc. Jian Chen was heavily injured. All his bones had been shattered. Not an inch of his body was without wounds. Even standing up became impossible. However, he was still brimming with life after suffering such severe injuries. Sensing the power of the laws that were wreaking havoc within him, the 4 strands of sword qi, from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, hidden on his arm all suddenly released with a weak strands of sword qi the moment Jian Chen wanted to condense the power of the way of the sword. The slivers of sword chi within him did not cause him any harm and instead entered his chest through his arm. They quickly spread through his entire body. Wherever they passed by, the destructive powers in Jian Chen would disperse. Very soon, all the destructive power in Jian Chen's body had been purged with the assistance of the 4 strands of sword chi. In the end, the slivers of sword chi dispersed by themselves due to being completely expended. However, Jian Chen's eyes narrowed when the slivers of sword chi dispersed. He could clearly sense that they deposited specks of light, like starlight, within him. As soon as he used his conscience to sense what they were, the comprehension of the way of the sword appeared in Jian Chen's head. The way of the sword. Jian Chen's eyes grew brighter. They were filled with excitement and joy. Even though he was heavily injured, his heart began to beat uncontrollably. The dispersion of the 4 slivers of sword chi have actually left mysterious specks of light containing the comprehension of the way of the sword in my body. If I absorb them, they'll definitely help me a bunch, thought Jian Chen. However, he also understood that now was not the time to comprehend the way of the sword. With a thought, gentle, white light immediately enveloped his body. As he bathed in the light, Jian Chen's wounds closed up at a visible rate, which was just astounding. Meanwhile, strands of chaotic force surged around Jian Chen's body. He pushed the regenerative properties of the chaotic body to the limit. He was healing as fast as he could using Radiant Saint Force Origin Energy and Chaotic Force. The 10-meter-tall tower dispersed after expending all its power during the strike. Along with the tower, the figure of the red-robed boy vanished as well. You really don't have that old bastard sword chi anymore. The red-robed boy's voice rang out. From behind the illusionary palace, another red-robed boy emerged. The presence he gave off was even more tremendous than the 2 from earlier. The boy was extremely fearful of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt sword chi. In order to waste all the sword chi in Jian Chen, he had used his first clone, but he was still worried that Jian Chen would conceal some of the sword chi, so he used another clone. He had used energy to condense both clones and the second clone had consumed a large amount in order to make his second clone appear exactly the same as his original body both in strength and presence. Although the clone was only able to deal a single strike at late reciprocity, the boy believed that the second clone was enough to test if Jian Chen still had any sword chi left from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The boy finally confirmed that Jian Chen had used up all the sword chi he had with him. He stared at Jian Chen who currently lay on the ground as mincemeat. I had to pay a very great price to condense a clone while under that old bastard suppression. I won't be able to recover from it. If it wasn't for testing whether you still had that old bastard sword chi, I really would have been unwilling to any waste clones on him. However, he no longer has any more sword chi, so it's time to take his life. The boy smiled victoriously and slowly made his way to Jian Chen. He immediately began to radiate with an indescribably tremendous sword chi. It was several times more powerful than the presence of his second clone. The figure of a tower had condensed above the boy at the same time. As soon as the tower appeared, the surroundings changed while the wind and clouds churned. The laws of the world seemed rather disturbed while in the presence of the tower. The tower seemed to contain both laws of destruction and creation, and between those 2 laws, there seemed to be the scorching and violent laws of fire. The Inata tower that the boy had just condensed actually possessed the power of 3 laws. However, the red-robed boy was only able to use a sliver of power from the laws of destruction among the 3 laws because the tower was damaged and no longer complete. At that moment, the boy seemed to have witnessed Jian Chen's death. He could not help but laugh aloud. So what if you'll become something impossible in the future? You still haven't matured. Today, I'll kill this impossible thing with my own bare hands. With that, the boy extended a finger toward Jian Chen and a dark light immediately condensed from the illusionary tower. It shot toward Jian Chen as a dark streak of light. In my prime, just a single strike was enough to obliterate a whole section of the universe. My strength has been greatly reduced now, but it's still an honor for you to die to this attack." The boy chuckled. However, just as the black streak of light shot toward Jian Chen with the power from the laws of destruction, a terrifying sword chi, enough to cause the boy to shiver, suddenly appeared. On Jian Chen's arm, 8 strands of sword chi shot out in a single moment. Each strand of sword chi was extremely powerful and also possessed the power of laws, the laws from the way of the sword. "That old bastard sword chi. How can you still have it? Bastard, you still have his sword chi. Were you willing to die instead of using them?" The boy's expression drastically changed. Disbelief flooded his face. The strands of sword chi moved extremely quick, as if they could pierce through space. They completely exceeded the speed of the dark light. The first strand of sword chi collided with the dark light. It silently dispersed. The power of the dark light was far greater than any of the sword chi, but after being obstructed, the light paused and slightly slowed down. The 7 other strands of sword chi all shot toward the red-robed boy. Their supreme speed locked the red-robed boy out of all options of dodging or blocking them. In a single moment, all 7 sword chi passed through the boy, causing him to produce a chilling shriek. His face became extremely vicious and fearful. It was fear for the nirvanic immortal exalt. Even though the boy was extremely powerful on the 9th floor, having reached godhood, the 7 strands of sword chi at the level of reciprocity possessed the power of laws from the way of the sword, enough to deal fatal injuries to him. The boy immediately began to fade and shriek after being hit, having almost been dispersed by the sword chi altogether. Even though the boy did not disperse, his presence began to leak from him like a deflating balloon after suffering these fatal wounds. It rapidly weakened, dropping below godhood in the blink of an eye. Slivers of sword chi seemed to have been deposited in his illusionary body, causing the boy's face to distort in pain. He constantly shrieked as his body trembled. The entire process happened in a single moment. The sword chi moved extremely quickly, injuring the boy more. However, the dark streak of light from the tower was moving closer and closer to Jian Chen. Chapter 1489, Immortal Emperor's Essence. Blood. With a flash of violet light in a crucial moment, the Ziying sword tore free from the ground and stopped in front of the dark light. Ding! The dark light loudly struck the Ziying sword, and it was blown far away with a clear sound. The dark light still had not dispersed as it continued toward Jian Chen. With a flash of azure light, the Qing Suo sword emerged from the ground as well. It stopped in front of the light just like the Ziying sword. It was knocked flying with a clear thrum as well. The several obstacles that stopped the dark light helped Jian Chen earn some valuable time. Right now, he had mostly recovered due to his Radiant Saint Force origin energy and chaotic force. All his bones had been reconnected. He endured the agonizing pain and immediately leaped up. He left behind a blur and reappeared 100 meters away. Boom! As soon as Jian Chen had moved away, the dark light struck where he had lay. The ground violently shook and a terrifying pulse of energy erupted, wreaking havoc in the surroundings as a storm. It blew Jian Chen away even though he was 100 meters away. This time, Jian Chen was blown several dozen kilometers away by the energy before landing heavily on the ground. Many of his bones had fractured and broken again, forcing him to repeat the healing process from earlier. Jian Chen basically climbed up as soon as he hit the ground. Without any hesitation, he charged off in the direction of the artifact spirit as quickly as he could. Along the way, he remained enshrouded by the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. Coupled with the circulation of his chaotic force inside, his wounds recovered at an extremely swift rate. The artifact spirit still isn't dead. While he's injured, I have to kill him in one fell swoop, just in case something ends up happened. Jian Chen gritted his teeth. Ignoring the pain from his body, he flew in the direction of the artifact spirit as quickly as he could. He crossed several dozen kilometers in the blink of an eye. When he returned back to the heavenly palace of Bisheng, he had recovered from 40% of his injuries while the artifact spirit had just managed to purge the sword qi within him. He stared at Jian Chen with a sunken face. Although his strength had dropped below godhood now, he was still enough to pressure Jian Chen. "Bastard, this is my last body and you've injured me so heavily. Even killing you won't be enough." The red-robed boy went completely insane. The killing intent in his eyes was thick as it could be. "I'll destroy your body before drawing out your soul. I'll have it undergo the most painful torture in the world for all of eternity and make you wish to be stuck in a cycle of rebirths instead. I'll use everything I have for you to taste the world's most agonizing pain," roared the boy. His hatred had reached a point where it could drown out space and make the world shake. The illusory tower appeared near the boy once again, present with the power of 3 different laws. Afterward, the boy opened his arms and did all he could to channel the remaining energy on the 9th floor into the tower, immediately having it erupt with power again. 4 illusory swords, 30,000 meters long, hung in the dark shattered space around the 4 boundaries of the 9th floor. At that moment, the 4 of them gently trembled and flickered with a faint light, immediately erupting with an even more powerful force. They suppressed the power of the tower on the 9th floor. The artifact spirit could only utilize an extremely limited amount of it after great difficulty. Even though the tower's power was suppressed, the tower the boy had conjured still much more powerful. At the same time, he poured a sliver of his own essence into the tower regardless of the consequences. He then sent the tower toward Jian Chen. The tower was illusory, but it was not something Jian Chen could afford to underestimate. He became stern. Although it was not as powerful as the strike from earlier, it made Jian Chen feel like he was facing death. "This strike is on the level of reciprocity." Jian Chen guessed the power of the tower and knew that it was not something he could handle with his injuries. At the same time, the azulate swords were not with him either, so he was unable to block the strike just by himself. Jian Chen showed no fear. With a flash of light, another 8 slivers of sword qi flew from his right arm toward the tower. They were also strands of sword qi left behind by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The ones Jian Chen had obtained from the 4 sword qi outside the 9th floor. Each sword qi could display the might of someone at reciprocity 3 times. After those 3 times were up, their power would decrease. The sword qi Jian Chen used was the weakened sword qi, now at returnance instead of reciprocity. The 8 strands of sword qi only possessed the power of returnance by themselves, but if combined, they were no weaker than a single reciprocity sword qi. Boom! The 8 slivers of sword qi collided with the tower and produced a rumble. The violent energy forced Jian Chen to retreat while the 8 strands of sword qi and the figure of the tower destroyed each other in the air. "God damn it, you actually still have that old bastard sword qi." The power might have weakened, but it was still left behind by him when he was still alive, the boy bellowed in utter fury. Jian Chen forcefully stabilized himself after moving back a certain distance. He had already recovered from half of his wounds, and seeing the violent storm of energy before him, he charged over with gritted teeth. He passed through the energy as quick as he could and arrived before the boy, sending out 4 strands of sword qi with a wave of his arm. The 4 slivers of sword qi were all shrunken versions of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt swords. Each strand was the size of a hand, but they now possessed the power of returnance, not reciprocity. However, the way of the sword imbued within them was still better than what Jian Chen had comprehended so far. The sword qi in Jian Chen's arm dulled after sending out the 4 strands. Their energy was almost exhausted. Spurt. 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 The 4 slivers of sword qi passed through the red-robed boy simultaneously, causing his body to tremble. He faded some more once more. At the same time, the boy waved his hand and sent a streak of light out composed from the power of the laws of destruction, which pierced Jian Chen's body. The attack caused Jian Chen to vomit blood. The power of the laws wildly wreaked havoc near his injury, causing it to rapidly expand. Jian Chen clenched his teeth while determination flooded his eyes. He stared fixedly at the boy and covered himself with light from his understanding of the way of the sword, and also used sword chi to fend off the power of laws in his wound. He condensed a sword from sword chi in his right hand and swung it at the boy. The boy shook violently as the madness in his eyes grew thicker. His face became extremely warped. He constantly threw his fists at Jian Chen. Each punch contained a sliver of power formed from laws, landing one after another and producing deep thuds. Jian Chen was sheet white and constantly vomited blood. He used the sword chi he had condensed in his hand to constantly slash at the boy. The boy's illusory figure violently trembled due to each attack and grew dimmer. In the end, the azulate swords flew over from the distance and pierced through the boy with a shocking amount of sword chi. Right now, both Jian Chen and the boy were severely injured. They were both extremely weak as well, making it impossible for either one of them to use any techniques. The Ziying sword had already returned to Jian Chen's hand. He wielded the weapon and, coupled with his way of the sword, demonstrated power no less than late receival. The boy's figure had almost dispersed from the consecutive attacks, but Jian Chen had paid an extremely heavy price as well. Not a single part of his body was complete as he endured the ferocious attacks from the boy. At the same time, the power of laws devastated his body, eating away his flesh. By now, Jian Chen had lost his right arm, half of his body, and a third of his head, almost injuring his soul. He was completely covered in blood and in a despicable shape. However, he still did not give up. He used his only remaining arm to continue slashing at the boy with the Ziying sword. The Qing Suo sword did not just lay around either. Under the sword spirit's control, it constantly pierced the boy. The battle between the two of them was extremely intense and had devolved into close combat. The boy was close to dispersing while Jian Chen was close to falling apart as well. He was just far too injured. If he did not have the support of his chaotic body, he probably would have died long ago. The boy wildly roared. Hatred filled his eyes as he bellowed, "I've never thought of this move in the past because it is my only chance at breaking free. However, I've run out of choices now." The boy suddenly raised a finger at the sky and a droplet of golden blood gradually materialized. It immediately radiated with an unbelievably powerful ripple of energy. Jian Chen's expression drastically changed when he saw the blood. Just the energy radiating from the blood made him feel like the world was ending, as if the droplet of blood possessed the power to destroy the world. Is this the Inata Grand Prime's essence blood? Jian Chen became ashen. He felt despair due to the blood. Ignoring that fact that he was injured, even if he was in an optimal condition, there was no way he could survive an encounter with the blood. The essence blood of an immortal emperor. The sword spirit cried out. That's not a Grand Prime's essence blood? Though, it's still not something I can endure even if it's not from a Grand Prime. Jian Chen stopped attacking the artifact spirit and stared at the blood in the sky. Even fleeing was wishful thinking with the blood in play. This is from Master's traitor of a disciple, Ta Ji. Back when Master had been heavily injured by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt and fled, she faced an ambush from that traitor. She killed him in the end and a droplet of Ta Ji's essence blood was left here, having been kept here since. I originally wanted to use this blood to break through the Nirvanic Old Bastard sword formation after his suppression ran out of energy, but I never thought that I'd have to use Ta Ji's essence blood on an ant like you. As the boy said that, he became calm. It seemed as though death was returning him to where he had come from. Boom! At the same time, the droplet of blood loudly exploded. A devastating power swept through the world, devouring space and crushing the ground. The explosion was indescribably powerful. It filled every corner of the world in a single moment, making it impossible to dodge as long as Jian Chen was on the 9th floor, you're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.